Welcome everyone. I'd like to call to order our May 12th, 2025 Addison School Board meeting to order. At this point in time, it is 6:32 according to the clock there. And I would like us to go around and do introductions, starting with Jason.
Jason Chance.
Steve Orzek.
Ron Mackliffe.
Mary Heather Noble.
Jamie McCallum.
Chastity Novak.
Trisha Allen.
Wendy Baker.
Barbara Wilson.
Suzanne Buck.
Nova Glickman.
Okay, and administrators in the audience.
Courtney Cron, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Matt Correnti, Director of Finance and Operations.
Okay, we
Are
do
there
have
any
a
board members on? Do
Yeah,
you
let's
mind just
look.
checking to make
Thank
sure?
you.
Negative.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
And we do have a quorum, so we will continue on here. Next is a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll move to adopt the agenda as printed.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Okay, the agenda has been adopted. Up next is our first public comment period. And this is the time where we invite public and encourage public to provide public comment. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person, and I will call on folks as in order, and both the online as well as in the room. Is there anyone that is wanting to do a public comment today? Anyone online? Raise your Zoom hand if you would like to make a public comment.
No one yet.
Okay. Next is a recommendation to approve the minutes of April 28th. Can I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes of April 28th.
A second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Thank you, Mary Heather. It was a lot, once again, to capture all of that. All those in favor of approving the minutes for April 28th, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Moving on to approving our ACSD bills. Jason.
No bill since the last meeting.
Wow.
All right.
We're just like moving here. Report of the student representative. Nava, do you want to?
Yeah.
Cool.
Hi everyone. Sorry, it's been a little while. I've had tennis going on and other stuff happening. But yeah. Speaking of stuff happening right now, the seniors are very busy with IB exams. Basically, this whole month of May, seniors are out of school. Out of school. But they're taking IB exams either in the morning or the afternoon blocks, and so seniors are really busy with that, but that is a big thing that's taking up a lot of people's time right now. And then for some more fun stuff, prom just happened. That was really exciting. It was my first prom, that's fun. Also, for senior class, peer leaders are being developed, so that's exciting. And so we're starting to work with the 8th graders. I'm not sure when their move-up day is, but that integration into the high school is starting to happen. And next year you'll be able to hear a lot more from me about that. Especially, I am one of the peer leader coordinators, which is exciting. And that means you'll get to hear about that and how the 8th graders are adjusting. So I think that's just something to keep a heads up for. And then my last thing is just some cool information. So at CVU, there's this junior. Her name is Zoe Epstein. Yeah, Epstein. And she is starting, I'm sure you've heard about it, because something called the Vermont Learners Association, or the VLA, in lieu of, or not lieu of, anyway, the VPA and the VSA, yeah, imitation of the, yes, all of the V's.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is just a group, and it's right now made up of, it's really new, it's starting, but it's made up of all of the student reps, not all of the student reps in the state of Vermont, but across like a lot of schools, especially in the ones that we know of more, the high schools, yeah, up towards Burlington, down towards Rutland, that sort of area, and so it's really cool, and our goal right now is to continue like gathering momentum, and the goal of the organization is to work with the VSA and the VPA and make student voices more heard and just sort of get that student perspective shared more across the state and come together. So that's really cool, and that's gonna keep growing, so that's exciting, yeah.
Excellent.
And if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Any questions? Steve?
Well, not a question, but I did want to recognize that Sophie Lawton was recognized as the Student of the Week.
Oh, she was, yes.
That we appreciate her service, and it is a good thing. I was rather pleased to see that she was recognized.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Any questions for Naga?
Thank you, Nava.
Yeah, thank you very much. Look forward to hearing more about everything you reported on. Next is report of the superintendent.
So beginning with personnel appointments and resignations, you've got a list in your agenda. There are a couple I'd draw your attention to.
Tracy?
One of them is Ellen Avidson, who is a speech and language pathologist. You might remember last year that it was very difficult to hire a speech and language pathologist. And actually we started the year 4 down. So I will likely bring you 2 more next time, and I mean, we're just so excited that we are hiring these really great people, and Ellen is one of them, so that's different this year. I don't know exactly what made the dearth or the plethora happen, but I'm happy to be on this end of it. Also, you see Tracy Harrington is recommended for appointment for the principal of Salisbury Community School, where both Ripton and Salisbury students will be learning. Tracy has served in the past as the principal of Ripton Elementary School. Many of her years there, she was a half-time, like a part-time principal in Ripton, and then a part-time special educator, a part-time special ed director, and she through this process, I think she's recalled the amount of joy that she experienced as a full-time principal and in the community development that happens in that. And her candidacy was unique in that she truly had an understanding of what it takes to bring communities together. And that meant a lot to the staff and I think the community that was able to weigh in that respect. So we're excited to have her in that position, and she's really excited to be taking it. She's leaving her special ed director position, which is sunsetting in that new model. Chris Johnstone is taking over for Stephanie Buzzle. You might remember, some of you, that Stephanie has been at the high school and has kind of been, a student data specialist, across that, a little bit of registrar, and many other things that go along with that. And then she's worked remotely because this position's been very difficult to fill. Now, what we have is a model where Chris will actually be working across 612 to provide some support in that work, which is going to be really helpful, not only for continuity of how we manage student data and information, but also just in providing those supports, those registrar supports, particularly with the middle school waterfall schedule, which keeps us all guessing. And then in the other side, we also have Carrie-Ann Severy, who is an instructional specialist in math. She comes to us from the Mount Abe district. She actually was formerly in Addison Central, and she's an example of a number of folks that we're seeing in a bit of a trend that have spent time in service here, have left to go on and do other things, and are migrating back, which I think feels good to people as a whole. And so Carrie-Ann has spent, part of her job with the Mount Abe district has been in doing some of this work. Her higher ed was designed to help her understand how best to lift capacity and practice in math. And then she's doing also other things in her role, and this is a chance for her to do all of that work here with us in this position. And so she's come to us and she's very skilled, and we're lucky to have her. So those are just a couple of things to point out where it's an exciting list. It's been an exciting spring, and we'll continue to see more of that as we go. So they are for your consideration.
Would you like? You do it so well, Suzanne.
I move to approve the following personnel appointments and resignations. Helen Higginson, SLP 1.0, Tracy Harrington, Principal 1.0, Chris Johnston, Student Data Systems Manager 1.0, Jerry Messner, Tech Support Specialist 1.0, Audra Ouellette, Paraprofessional 1.0, Carrie Ann Severy, Instructional Specialist Math 1.0, and accept the resignation of Lindsay Odette, Paraprofessional, effective 5/15.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions, discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the list of personal appointments and resignations, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, Laura.
Okay, the next item is just an update on I'm not sure if this is the right phrasing actually, but just sort of the continuation of conversation in terms of where we're going with the Ripton Elementary School, what's important in thinking about that from a community perspective as well as from an educational perspective. I met the first week in May with Lori Cox and I, who is the chair of the select board in Ripton, are kind of working together. We gathered a group of people together to meet, to begin discussion about how do we approach these conversations together and what does that look like. There is a second select board member in Ripton who appreciates being able to attend the conversations and lend expertise. And so they've made the decision, which I think is great, to warn these conversations as special select board meetings, so that way they're recorded, and you can find them on their website where they keep such things. We really, the first meeting really, we just were sort of brainstorming where are we and what are some things that we need to think about, and they also were in favor of us just bringing in a third party that can help us generate what are the right questions to be asking, what are the right things to be thinking about, and how can we go about that. So they had some suggestions, and the Center for Community Engagement at the college gave us some suggestions, and so Emily Listine and I are in the process of kind of trying to find someone who has some time and some good expertise that then we can begin to think about, with the idea of trying to present a report to the board as to where we are and some options to move forward, perhaps in October, beginning of October relative to that. So otherwise, we are settling the students into projected new routines, and including the fact that Ripton Elementary is the only of the elementary schools that starts at 8 rather than 7:45, in terms of that, and they have an after-school time where kids can be there if needed from 3 to 3:45, so how do we mirror those things? And so we're in these conversations, and we've just begun to make sure we're covering everything together, so the students have attended informational meetings at Salisbury. Those have been very well attended, and I think the entire staff at Salisbury Elementary Community School was in attendance at those, and so I think generally speaking, there's a good feeling about how the kids are landing and how we're working together to do that. So the next time we will be meeting, we're talking about maybe a little bit of an advisory team, a team that advises the superintendent, meeting, say, again, the end of May, and we're shooting to sort of have 4 folks from the district that are thinkers in that, and then 4 folks from the community that are thinkers in that. So That's as far as we've gotten so far, and I just wanted to give you an update and ask your perspective on that work and see if there's something you'd also like us to consider that you haven't heard about so far. Well, the window's not closed for that input, you know, but you know, we'll just kind of keep moving ourselves along and keep updating and seeing where we are.
Wendy, I will say I continue to really appreciate your thoughtful approach to these sorts of issues, and that's something that noticed and appreciated, that you're very good at keeping us apprised of what's happening, but also gives us a view into really the step-by-step thought process that we're moving through, and that's appreciated.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. You know, together we're finding, okay, these are some things that we didn't think about, right? You know, it's and here's some things we did think about, and oh, geez, you know, we got to work through these together. So I think the relationships are building and good, and that helps whenever you're working on tough things. And I really appreciate you know, Lori Cox particularly, but just the select board's engagement, not only in Ripton, but if we're ready to move on to the next
Yes.
item, you know, also in Shoreham and Bridport, you know, both of those select boards held meetings to just, you know, give the community an opportunity to talk about, you know, different grade configuration options that, you know, parents were weighing in on, and the state of things at large, you know, from the state. There were different types of conversations that come together, and I think in both communities, it's been a while, given the transitions that have taken place, since that sort of open dialogue has happened, and I think it's been appreciated, and the select boards have really been wonderful community stewards in pulling that together. And I will also say, before just talking about the report in general, that it has been really appreciated that there have been board members that have been able to just pop out and be part of those meetings and conversations, because you know, community members are deeply trusted, right? I think in Addison County as a whole, but also just in this district, and having people here who have those deeper community ties and have been able to be part, or at least even from the sides, conversations that have taken place over time, is really meant a lot to people, I think. It's not just the superintendent showing up, giving information, and so on and so forth. It feels like there's a different level of investment, and you know, not everybody can do that all the time, right? But those that have been able to come, you know, when there have been meetings open to the public, it's just been really appreciated by me. So that when I say the wrong thing, you know, right, somebody go, I think what she means is this, you know, and also, you know, just so that we're all able to hear each other, which is, you know, it's hard when you're just coming into conversations knowing what someone might mean by something they say if you don't have the context always. So that's been really wonderful. That said, the grade configuration report was in your packet. It's been shared widely with community members, parents and community members from both communities, and staff, and it's on this agenda item as just a place to have some conversation about it. There's no recommended change. I'm not recommending that you consider a change for the next school year. You could if you wanted to, but I'm not coming with a recommendation around that. You know, the report does say that a third option that was generated through the comments is the possibility of, say, preschool being relocated to Shoreham Elementary School, and then the bigger campus, which is Bridport, housing K through 5 students from both communities. So that is one that we will put a group together to do proper analysis of. So that we can determine, you know, what are actually all the logistics of that, what are the costs associated with that, what are all the different pieces that you know, the transportation pieces, just all of that, and we'll do that with a mix of parents who, you know, are stepping forward in both communities, as well as district staff, unlike me, who are actually in the details of those things. And that, you know, that's something that, again, the thought is that we will have a report to you in October, you know, probably very beginning of October, to say, here's what we've learned, here's what we found, and it may or may not be something that we recommend, that you consider as a board, depending upon what the analysis looks like, but that's when we'll have something for you, given it's hard to pull people together a little bit in the summer, so giving a little extra time for that. Yep, so this is really time just to have you be able to ask questions about the report, or give me feedback about what you appreciated in it, what you would have liked to have seen, what I should be thinking about from here.
Mary Heather.
Just a couple of clarification things, just for my notes. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the third option that you had mentioned is something that you'll put some work toward investigating as part of for beyond, not, obviously not for 2025, 26 year, but potentially.
26, 27.
Right.
Yes, it came up actually with a degree of wider spread support, I would say, during the mums meeting when the parents from both communities were together. We probably had about 40 people in attendance at that. And then in the comments that people had written in the report, where the feeling was that there's concern about making sure that we have more students proficient as soon as we can. That was something that I think people heard and feels important. There's also a thought that this option B, which was K1, 2 in one school and 3, 4, 5 in the other, wasn't the right option to do that. And for some people it wasn't the right option because it was quick. For other people it wasn't the right option because the K5s aren't together, and that's really important, or because their children aren't together in a K5 world. They might have one child at a K1, 2 and another at a 3, 4, 5, and that presented both logistical challenges as well as just kind of, that's not what they thought, of. But there is an understanding that they heard, as you can see in the report, that the educators' feelings are in the context of needing to bring a number of kids forward in significant ways, that a single grade would be a more effective way to do that. That doesn't mean that single grade classrooms are better or worse than multi-grade classrooms as a whole. It's not a commentary on that discussion. It's more, in this circumstance, with this group of educators and this group of students and this group of proficiencies, as a whole, the educators felt that was an important piece. Whether or not that should be done next year, and in this option B, that was the piece that really people wrestled with, I think, the most. That is not to say that there aren't certainly some people who engaged with this process, so many who engaged with this process, that really feel strongly that students should remain in their towns, right, under any circumstance. There's certainly people who feel that way. I think there were different elements maybe in this conversation than had surfaced before, according to those that have paid attention for a while.
So just to follow up, so the survey that parents were given though, was this third option among the choices?
It wasn't, and it wasn't on purpose, because I said this is not an option for next year.
Gotcha.
This is something that takes looking into to make sure that if we're going to do that, we're doing that correctly. Preschool has some different facilities configurations than K through 5. There are a number of pieces that need to be taken into consideration, and so I didn't give it as an option, for 25, 26. It surfaced anyway as something that should be looked into for 26, 27. Whether it is a viable choice that we would choose to recommend or you would choose to approve remains to be seen. But I think there is some appreciation for looking into it and then determining sort of what the facts are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Steve?
It seems that the staff results were a little different than what the communities were. So have there been discussions with the staff about why their preferred option wasn't chosen? To make them feel like they're still being heard, because teachers often feel that they're not heard in these discussions, so.
Yes, I hope our teachers feel heard. You know, I've certainly tried to make that, you know, a priority in the process. We did talk about, you know, where we were, and I let them know that, you know, in order to make a change like that, now for next year, we really needed to have everybody together in doing that. And I think, if we're gonna make a big change like that, and there's a substantial portion of our parent population that feels that they either can't manage the logistics as a family, or that, wait a minute, this doesn't feel like the right thing to do, that's going to cause, maybe it solves some challenges, and it's gonna cause a whole host of others. And so, you know, I said, we have to be working together as we're analyzing these pieces and determining how to handle things. So, you know, I think they are, you know, they're sort of coming to grips, I would say, with the idea that, okay, they've got a big job, and though there will be support to do that, they've got a big job, you know, and that's not, you know, that's not an easy thing. One of the things that I don't think we've talked about is that, you know, you might remember the K-1-2 classroom that's in Ripton this year, that's ending. So that was a very difficult assignment. Melissa, you know, has a master's degree in curriculum and instruction, and sort of agreed to take that on in some ways, so the beginning was a little bit different. However, Joy Dobson, who taught in Weybridge in a multi-grade configuration for many, many years, and is also a presidential math award-winning teacher, you know, she worked with Melissa for 3 hours a week for the entire school year, and the way that those kids have performed on our screeners and assessments is exceptional. And so you know, Joy is going to work together with Weybridge and Shoreham and Bridport, and you know, and we're putting that and other supports in place to try to make sure that this next year feels very successful and good. You know, and I think we're working our way through it. You know, so that's probably the truth of it. Yeah.
Others? Go ahead, Ron.
Dr. Baker, we can probably talk about this on Wednesday in the community and engagement meeting, but I was wondering if you have any ideas that you want to present to the whole board about how kind of these kind of not regular, but meetings that you're planning to hold with Ripton and this kind of advisory board that you want to build, whether our committee should have a role in that or support you in some way, or kind of should we integrate, because one of the things we're thinking about doing as a committee is to kind of rotate those meetings so that it happens once in a while in every town.
Yep, when you say, did you mean Ripton or did you mean Bridport Shoreham, or both, you know, as we're kind of working through special projects?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
One of the things that has been very helpful is that, you know, members of the Communication Engagement Committee have often, you know, attended meetings where, you know, we really have to forge new ground in how we work together, you know, just as a way to be part of that. And I think that's been great, and I would love to, you know, have that support continue from communications and engagement. Could be from anybody, but it's sort of natural, you know, in that group. I think the Bridport and Shoreham and the Ripton conversations they reflect kind of a special project, if you will, you know, in each case. I think what would be helpful to our teams, I think, is probably perhaps some of the, whether it's policy work or, you know, the overarching work that happens from the full board around how do we think about community engagement? Because in some cases, I think the community engagement efforts that our team have put together, and I do mean team, you know, like it has not been me, you know, Matt has been part of it, Courtney has been part of the meetings, Emily Blistein has been an important part of the team, Darcy has, you know, worked to pull things together. So the, in some, they've been appreciated, but sometimes we've gotten lucky, right, in that appreciation, and then other times we've made the right choice, but the more we can work together and say, this is the mindset that we're adopting related to community engagement pieces, this is our approach, this is how we're thinking about that. Here are 4 different types of community engagement, like to inform, to solicit input, all of that. In the Bridport Select Board meeting that Suzanne and Barb and Tricia were at, the information came that night that influenced the report, as it was released the next day. So I think thinking about what is our general purpose and what does that look like, that will help streamline things for us. Because then we will have a template to go from, right? We'll have something to work from as we're thinking about an operational piece that we need to move forward. And that will make it so that if I'm not in the room, or Emily's not in the room, or or Matt or Courtney are thinking about something different, we all have something to draw from. And I think the board leadership in that area as a whole would be really helpful.
Thanks.
Anyone else? I would like to thank you. It's been an interesting, 6 weeks or maybe even less. And I think you really kind of led by example and, of how to engage and really bringing the community together, even though things in both cases have been kind of rocky. And
Right.
I really think we can learn a lot from the example that you have provided us, and I just really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate that the team has had nights out, we have the day shift and the night shift in the district office, right? These are extension of hours, to do this work. And it also, we can talk about hard things. It's okay if we just come together and we talk about hard things. I have not found in any of this work that, there's some, maybe perhaps avoidance of that on either, side, community side or district side sometimes, maybe in the past as difficult paths have kind of worked themselves out, but we can talk about hard things, and we can come together to determine what to do, and it's been wonderful to be a part of that, and I have never felt alone in that effort, which I appreciate very much, because that doesn't lead to really something sustainable or the best ideas being the ones that come forward. So I really have appreciated that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so the last item on the superintendent's report is a legislative update. So we are coming down to the wire relative to the legislative session. At least I think that's what the legislators are hoping for in terms of kind of getting to the end. The end of the legislative session typically has both bodies voting out their last pieces of legislation. With the ed transformation pieces, the last committee, I think, is the Senate Finance Committee that hopes to vote out, according to Ruth Hardy's discussions this weekend, the bill on Thursday. And then they're not the same. The House and Senate bills are not the same. So then it would go to conference chair with conference committee, which usually has the chairs, of in this case probably the 2 ed committees, and perhaps other committees that are coming together, and sometimes vice chair leadership that helps that, unless those in legislative leadership choose a different structure, which is always possible. So we had the forum on Saturday that I know a number of you were able to attend. Senator Heffernan, Hardy, and Representative Conlon were there, talked about kind of the process and what this looks like, and all area superintendents were there and just sort of gave a sense of what's on their mind, relative to the district. And I think you know, Matt has been for weeks working on a side-by-side comparison kind of, which will continue to evolve as the whole funding formula evolves. You know, for us, I think it comes down to whether or not the state chooses to fund special education at 100%. If they do, because you know, our data for FY25 is incorrect, our poverty data is incorrect, and our budget was inflated because we still had ESSER positions that were in it without the revenues that were in it. When I spoke with Senator Hardy this weekend, you know, and just said this, we're trying to model this right and see what we can do. Her suggestion was to actually just think about FY26 data because, you know, they'll do the same thing, you know, with as they're continuing to move this forward. And when we do that, you know, our first guess is that if, with either formula, if they fund special education at 100%, regardless of whether they change the formulas or not, we will probably not have a material effect in either formula. Because we already made changes to hold our spending, right, our top line spending, where you asked us to, and our denominator, you know, is getting bigger because we have our students who are struggling financially properly counted. So those are two formula shifts that are just really important in thinking about how these formulas impact us. We have right-sized our per pupil spending for FY26 to be 15,098, you know, per pupil. And, you know, the formulas aren't terribly off of that in terms of a base. So although the weights shift things a little bit here or there, you know, we're waiting on special ed funding because, you know, is it 40%, 42%, 50% of our special ed
Census
spending?
block grants currently 42% coverage.
Yeah, so how they choose to go about that, you know, where we've heard statements that say they're funding special education at 100% in any formula because we have a legal responsibility for maintenance of effort. So, you know, if we change our model, that's one thing. If we just cut it, that's not legal for us to do. So they have said they will do that. If they continue to do that, you know, then we may not see a material effect.
And this is with either version, either the House or the Senate, it all really hinges on the special education funding, that's what I'm hearing?
Yes.
So one thing I can add is that, you know, the census block grant is under both models traded out for special education weights. So they would swap out the block grant, which is based solely on overall enrollment, and instead do individual weights for different tiers of disability. So that's going to be something that we'll be learning about together.
And those, yeah, and part of the learning in that is that those weights don't connect with any programmatic categorizations. You know, it's not like if you are, you know, you're a 3 if you have multiple disabilities, or you're a 1 if you only have a cognitive disability, or
Well, exactly, they're not all.
There's no such stratification on the programming side, so the weights and it's very hard to match up what we have. So Matt, in this good work that he's done, is, you know, he's kind of put together, okay, here's a reasonable place to start, and we'll keep listening and we'll just keep updating, you know. That said, I think, you know, I will say that it is the position of both the School Boards Association and the Superintendents Association that an empirically based formula is what the legislature should be paying most attention to, and that is Dr. Colby's, you know, formula. That's any of us that listen to the testimony about what a foundation formula is and how it works learned a lot, and this is her academic life's work. She happens to also be on the state board and, be a professor at the University of Vermont. And so, given Act 127 and the challenges that come from when a citizen legislature starts to tinker with things, we feel most confident in something that has been derived, at least on the academic side, from a strong research base. And so, if we're going to go in this direction, that feels like a point of advocacy that I certainly feel comfortable making.
Questions? Steve?
Is the reporting still accurate when it says that Addison County is going to lose the most funding? Because that's still what's being reported.
Yeah, and I'll say a little thing, and then Matt's probably got more detail. The thing I'll say, yeah, I know he has more detail. I'm just giving him a minute to just make him think of the ones he wants to say. So Grand Isle County is probably where actually things are hit the hardest, in this new calculation. We have worked with the Agency of Ed, APA Consulting, and the Joint Fiscal Office to try to get our data correct and corrected. And the best we've been able to get is that there'll be an asterisk next to it, which is similar to what they're doing with Lincoln School District when they report Lincoln's numbers without their high school students. And, in a way that it's like, okay, this is not really what's reflected in what they're doing. There's an asterisk there. So I think what I've accepted, probably more so than Matt, is that we will get out of this legislative session without really a lot of facts, and we will enter into the next legislative session with FY26 that people will be developing reporting on, and that will feel more accurate in that sense. So Addison County certainly, we are connected to Chittenden County salaries, and we have sparsity that comes from our geography in that sense. So those two things alone, are challenges, particularly where the Middlebury College students are counted in our sparsity. And when Addison County, when really they're talking about Addison County, but they're really listing our bigger districts. Right? They're not talking about what's happening in Orwell, Hancock, Granville, Leicester, Whiting, Rochester, other towns that are in Addison County. So I think if you took us all together and you said what's happening here, I'm not sure if the picture would be the same. And that's a message that we're trying to actively convey is important, so that it's real. Okay.
Yeah, so there's two big caveats, right? You touched on the first one, which is that modeling assumes no redistricting, right? So when we're modeling right now, we're saying everything as it is, using the new weights and the new foundation formulas. If redistricting accompanied modeling, then all the data would shift. So we can only compare what we can compare. When we did see some of those biggest loser narratives starting to emerge, we were pretty intent on digging into that to make sure that if it was true, that we had as much planning time as possible to figure out where 20% was going to come from, and first and foremost whether or not it's true. So that's where the identification of the impact that FY25 poverty data came to light, and we said, all right, well, what if we plugged in the FY26 poverty percentage instead, which we feel more accurately represents our district, and that had the effect of essentially having the disadvantage from order of magnitude 20% down to around 10%. The other thing that wasn't in that initial assessment was special ed, because when the state came out with their first model, special ed was going to be a categorical similar to how it is now, and they just said we'll pay for 100% of whatever it is. The later model shifted to these new weights, and so because we now had weights, when we were calculating the formula, we could make a guess at what special ed would be funded at. That completed the puzzle, right? So we were missing a big cost center until we got to add those weights in and make the assumption that based on how many IEPs we have and the rough distribution of those relative to the new categories, this could be what our special ed payment looks like. Now we have like the whole picture. We can say that 10% disadvantage with the correct poverty data probably looks like more like a 0. That's where that immaterial assessment comes in.
Which actually, when you try to apply the common sense test to some of these things, do you know offhand what the average per pupil spending number is for FY26?
Statewide.
You might cook up something that's in the 14s,
Right.
that's what I'm thinking, right? Okay, so we're not that far from that. So, it makes sense that we're not going to be potentially a big change in that scenario. So, if we're thinking about the right data, and we're thinking also about the change in spending that's come from not continuing to carry those ESSER funded positions and so on and so forth. So we'll see, we will see. There's a big asterisk around all of this,
Right.
We'll see.
Jamie?
Do you think that is there a similar likely discrepancy with other Addison County districts?
I couldn't
You
speak
don't-
to
you don't-
that,
you don't know.
and part of the reason that I can't speak to that is that I assume their data is closer to being correct than ours was.
Okay.
But again, I don't know with Addison Northwest, I know their budget, went through a couple different times, so I don't know exactly what their context is.
Okay. I
You
mean,
know,
I'm just asking because the narrative that came out of the thing on Saturday, which I was at, was that, people kept saying, we're gonna be hit hard, and ACSD might be hit the hardest. That was voiced a couple times, even though you did stand up and say, well, it's maybe a little bit different. But it gave the impression that like our students are going to school in like marble buildings with like gleaming new technology everywhere, like we were just like overflowing with money. And that, well, it made sense, of course, to take it and give it to, and so it's interesting, just like and especially if it's incorrect,
Right.
that data is already sort of given rise to the sort of narrative that like there's an overabundance of resources being placed, and I feel like that was really was part of a motivating talking point for a lot of the folks on stage on Saturday, and the fact that it might not be true is interesting.
We're just trying to figure out what the facts are, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, if it's draconian, we'll tell you it's draconian. If it's, you know what I mean? We're just trying to figure out what is actually real, and actionable on our part. So, and we may not have this right. I mean, I trust Matt's analysis, it's difficult there are a lot of moving parts, that are going on. And so we're just gonna continue to make this work, and we may, in the spotlight, continue to, just kind of say, here's what we think we understand now, and here's where we are now. So the 2 points of advocacy that I think that I will be participating in is to ensure that 100% special education commitment is in fact upheld. And looking at a formula that is a package, a foundation formula that is a package, which Tammy Colby's formula is. It goes together. If you change one thing, then it changes something else. And that's, I think, more what happened in the Senate version, because the Senate wanted to try to get the total spend to be level with the FY25 spend, as opposed to determine, okay, what is it that we should be thinking about as to how we provide an adequacy payment, on a per student basis for our students across the state. So I think, those are the 2 points that feel solid and that I would be advocating for.
In the Senate Finance Committee, that's what they're looking at right this moment over the next couple days and Ruth has very much advocated for using Colby's work as opposed to backing into weights based on keeping the budget level, right? She's attempted many times to explain why you just can't back into the number. I'm not sure, the success she's having. I think there may be enough to pass finance. Then we'll have to see what happens when it goes to the floor.
I think there were, Saturday felt a little surreal in the sense that, the legislators said, okay, well, taxpayers will no longer vote in their budgets. And likely a lot of our smaller schools will no longer exist. And this county will have a lot less money to deal with. And what they didn't say but could have added is if you are in counties across the state, perhaps Addison County isn't one of them, that get more money, your taxes actually will go up.
Yes.
And the thing that concerns me is not the operations of that, we'll adjust, we'll figure it out, we'll manage. It is that I'm afraid that this session is going to end with a lot of these concepts that people that don't follow this on a daily basis, right, are not necessarily going to be thinking about. And then 6 months from now, there will be absolute outrage. And whatever ground we've gained is going to be in jeopardy, and we will spend another year in turmoil, which I think is hard. I mean, it's taken us a while to help our communities understand the changes that we've made to D6, right? I mean, as a point of reference, so I heard all this, and there was, it felt like maybe it's not sinking in. These are huge changes in how we do things, and I'm not making a comment as to whether they're needed or not, but just they're really big, and I worry that our communities, who don't follow this all the time, have a way of thinking about this.
Right. Mary Heather?
I'm wondering, and I don't know if now's the right time or whether we have it later on in the report of the board, but I'm wondering, obviously the Senate Finance Committee is, planning to make a decision on this in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of time for folks to provide input. But I'm wondering a couple things. One, what are VSA, the Superintendent's Associations, like what are they doing to advocate? And then secondly, is there time, does it make sense for our board to come together to provide? Because it seems to me like the House version sure was a lot more based in reality and than the Senate version. And however they fight it out in this after committee, I sure would like to make sure there's input kind of rooting for the same things, the empirically based data, the formula, and certainly commitment to special education money. So what are your thoughts about our opportunity to provide input as a board, as individual board members, as VSA? Just what are your thoughts about the timeline we're working with?
Well, VSA and VSBA, I don't know if the other Vs are on there, I'm just trying to think of VASBO and the principals, did submit a letter that's circulating now that basically says, okay, here are the position points that are of concern to us, and it does speak to the work of the House largely. There's an increased privatization that's happened in the conversations in the Senate. The Senate also keeps supervisory unions, which flies in the face of an efficiency model that we're trying to find our way forward. It appears to be a lot more political activity in the Senate version than in the House version. Not that it's absent political activity, I don't want to suggest that, but there just seems to be a different type of focus there. So that's coming along. I think what's in our interest is that they do it right, and that means that the House version of who is digging into the districts, which right now has content area experts relative to a number of different factors, that's different from legislators, that are coming together to draw boundaries, which will be done in a political way. Again, not that there's an absence of politics anywhere in making public policy, but we want to minimize it when we're talking about what's best for kids. So I think, there are some of those pieces in the House bill that felt like the House, if we went with that, we'd have a better chance of getting it right, which feels really important. So, I think you do have an opportunity if you wish to as a board to sort of commission that kind of, testimony that can be submitted to Senate Finance. You could even build it off of this, platform here if you wanted to. Otherwise, I would suggest that you are, you're writing and you're submitting things to the Senate Finance directly, not just to Ruth, but to the Senate Finance, because they will have to read that testimony into the record. So, I think you could certainly choose to do that as individuals, knowledgeable individuals, if you wanted to, relative to, whatever your perspective was, so.
And then a little later on the agenda, what we can do is spend a little bit more time to decide what we want to do as a board around this.
Thank you.
And one thing that's not on that list, it doesn't really talk to a special education.
Correct.
It's only really talking to what was in the House bill versus the Senate bill. And, so, and even today when I was listening to them, they keep saying things like, well, we'll have to finish it next year. So there's gonna be some broad concepts that I think they're thinking they're gonna then have more detail in next year's session. But it's a little scary.
Just a final thought is that it's tempting, I've had this sort of from superintendent colleagues and I think Barb, just in our positions, right, as chair and superintendent, it's tempting for multiple districts to want to get together and think through things, like, well, how would we do this? Kind of in an early adoption, or maybe even if we get out in front of it, we could choose to do a thing before they let it, have us do a thing. And I'm very cautious about participating in those conversations because there's so much right now that's unknown. I think it's always good for area superintendents to be in conversation about anything. That's a good thing. However, I want to make sure that that my participation in that is one of caution, and I think if I'm asked about whether or not our county should be coming together, that conversation for me is the whole county. It's not only, one or two or three or four or whatever it is, right, a partial bit of the county. It's like, well, if this is a county, and we're thinking about this as a county, because we're lining up with other county supports that are in place, whether it's Health and Human Services or, or emergency services or judicial services, then we need to be working together, to think about that. So I just want to just make you aware of that, and if you have specific direction for me and to be in service, then please provide it.
And when, under report of the chair, when we're at the potential action on the bill, I also do want to share with you on Saturday, the chair of Addison Northwest. He's trying to get the board chairs together, so I want to talk about that a little bit, to see what folks think about that. And I did send, he's already sent an email out. I did respond earlier today to say that I was going to bring it up at the board tonight and kind of get my direction, from the board, because I'm only one person on the board, So, But we'll talk about that a little bit more, under the next topic, or the next, major agenda area.
Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Ran the averages for per pupil, or per weighted pupil, and it's,
For FY '26?
for FY '26, yeah, it's 13,872 when it's weighted by LTWADM and 1438 unweighted, so.
Which one compares to our 1598?
Well, they both do, but weighted just takes into account how big the district is,
Okay, got it.
so,
As opposed to just average.
right. Because we have some really tiny districts, and so we don't want their figure to count the same. So the better average is probably 13,872.
The comparison number for us.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Wendy before we move on? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, next up, under report of the chair, we are going to continue with the work we had started at our last board meeting on goal setting. In your package, you should have seen some work that the executive committee did to kind of pull together input that we received, as well as kind of wordsmithing the actual goal and coming up with some language that we can then talk about here and further tweak as necessary, so that we can, number one, really finalize what our goals are tonight. Then beyond that, what we need to do is start to think about what's needed to meet these goals, what specifics we wanna, as you'll see, based on board member input, there's ideas around what it looks like, to succeed in meeting these goals. And then, even more so, beyond this work, we need to do superintendent goals, right? But tonight, we're gonna focus on really crystallizing or, finalizing our board goals for this particular year. And thank you so much, Jason, for reading my mind. I was just thinking it'd be really nice to display this. Thank you. So the first is under community engagement. And the suggested wording is the ACSD board will adopt a community engagement policy that adheres to the, and I can't read that part. Recurrent, thank you, AOE rules 113.1.1 and 113.2.3, and establishes a written communications and engagement plan for applicable district/board work. So, thoughts? Tweaks? Jason?
Yes, I love the idea of us having sort of a, like when you said, maybe a template or a roadmap that helps guide us when we have some project, initiative, strategic objective, whatever, that sort of forces us to say, hey, what does good community engagement look like for this particular process? It's not going to be the same for every single process. And what are some of the things that, for a 5-year strategic plan, we might want to engage in, whereas if it's a community discussion about a particular initiative at a particular building, it's a different set of criteria. So I really like the idea of having us have something templated and established that's reusable.
Thank you. And based on that, would you change the suggested wording of the goal, or that would be more of an objective underneath that goal?
No, I think I like the fact that it says district/board work. It doesn't specify either. That's great.
Okay.
The recurrent AOE rules are just those two listed. Is that the,
Those were the two that we, that was in the AOE rules, that we were prioritizing that had to do with, community engagement and.
yeah, no, I like it, and I think the actual implementation of it on a case-by-case basis is where
Right,
the rubber meets
where the
road
work
there.
is, yes. Thank you for that. Others? Thoughts? Obviously, there's work to do on the implementation. It's really getting that North Star aligned so that, then we can, work really on that implementation. Mary Heather?
I'll just kind of try to ground this a little bit too in some past efforts that the board has made. So, and Tricia, you may remember from last year, prior board communication engagement committees had tried to put together kind of a communication engagement plan with some procedures around like how does public comment work at meetings, and kind of talking about trying to set forth this sort of like this document of expectations for what we think is kind of best practice for community engagement and communications for our work. And that never really got off the ground. So things were sort of started, and then we would have an event and try to kind of put it together, see how it worked, and then other priorities took us in other directions. So so there is some work, and the board, you may remember last year, we had kind of adopted sort of a procedure to go along with policy A21, I think, around public comment. So it's kind of the same idea of setting sort of a blueprint for what our expectations are. And Dr. Baker had pointed out when we were discussing this in the executive committee meeting that is just would be most helpful, I think, to the district as well, and not just our body when we're trying to do public engagement, like around the budgeting or something, so that we have kind of a set of best practices or expectations for certain situations, almost like a menu of options that you can, okay, well, we're doing this type of community engagement, these are the pieces that we would pull together to create a plan for this particular circumstance. So that's the idea, and the board member input are great details that could go in some of those plans, but the goal itself, we wanted to keep it at very high level so that it was just like, we're gonna create a policy that says, here's what we think engagement should, what our expectations are for that, and that every time we do engagement, we'll have a plan or something. So that's, I just wanted to provide a little bit of grounding context so that folks who submitted input didn't feel like, well, how come this didn't get in there? I think these are just the details that would come like when plans are made, as opposed to including it, the higher level goal.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Heather. Yes, Tricia.
Well, and kind of speaking to the documents that Mary Heather's referencing, I feel like those documents are definitely, yes, needed, helpful, great, but also really addressed almost board member to board member, like, hey, here's how you react if you get an email, right? Here's how this is specific steps for this specific thing. Whereas where I hope we're moving to is more of a, it's a board culture that welcomes community engagement, so I would hope that the development of the policy, and I do absolutely see the benefit of at least starting at this high level and getting this base work done, but really feel like the board itself and individual board members as part of that board need to work on a mindset change, right, or a viewpoint change where it's not because A, now B, but rather how do we get this information? What don't we know? How can we be curious?
You mean like IB?
Yes, right? How can we lean into our IB learner profile?
Sorry.
And no, it's completely
Perfect.
relevant. So I do think it's great to look at kind of those founding documents and what we've tried to launch in the past, but I think that this is an opportunity for us as a board to really embrace best practices and focus on kind of a board cultural shift in how we are interacting and involving the community.
If you set policy, you'll set that for the district, it'll be a district shift, it won't,
Right.
it'll be an operational, piece
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
Which I
Yeah.
think will be helpful,
Which will continue.
help us build systems.
So, before we get into that, is there any other, what I'd like to do is to get a show of hands ultimately that, we're happy with the wording of the goal. And then we can talk more about other aspects of this a little bit after we've done that. So Jamie, did you have something about that, or it's more the implementation of it?
I think it's that.
Okay. So, your choice, we can do a formal motion on this, or we could do a show of hands. What do people feel the most comfortable doing? As far as the goal and adopting this goal.
I think a motion.
Okay, would someone like to give a motion?
I'll make a motion. Okay, so I move that we adopt this suggested goal as written here about the formation of a community engagement policy, specifically related to these two AOE rules.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Jason?
We want to make this SMART goal time bound and actually put some dates in there, due dates, or does it imply that this is for this year? Or
Yeah, so what I think I would like to do is have our retreat this summer centered around this goal. And, basically having expertise come in to help facilitate a retreat on community engagement and the different kinds of community engagement, and having it to be an environment where we can talk and run ideas by, so it's not such a formal setting as what we have here in a board meeting. So that, June, July kind of timeframe, to set up a date to do that. What I have done is reached out to the Middlebury College Center for Community Engagement. And the woman I needed to talk to last week was out of the office, so I'm hoping either tomorrow or Wednesday, I'll be able to speak to them to see if they could help, really facilitate such a meeting, and if not, if they had some recommendations that they can provide. So I think, possibly we could have really for this year objectives underneath this goal. We could adopt this goal, and then we could basically, out of that work, identify this is what we're going to do with some dates. How's that sound?
Good.
But I think it really, as Tricia said, is kind of like, it's really a cultural shift. I think it really lends itself nicely to have a retreat around this, and that would be like our primary focus.
As far as wording for this goal,
Yep.
I've been sitting here rereading it a bunch of times and trying to figure out, the second part establishes a written communications and engagement plan. I keep going, well, like a procedure, right? Like, is that really, we're looking at creating the policy and the procedure? Like, that's really,
I
like,
hear plan is different from procedure.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
right?
Plan is kind of like,
Let's-
here's the approach, here's the, you know, the maybe, indicators that you have, fulfilled, the community engagement, policy objectives that we've put out there. But the procedure is going to depend a lot on the type of scenario that we're working our way through, you know, so I would say that is like, okay, now that we have that, how is it that we go, how do we use that, and what are the procedures that relate to that? So, you know, I can imagine Emily, for example, saying, okay, well, the first thing I always do is I look to do the following, right? And then I do that, and then I do this, and then, you know, unless there's something else, you know, that comes into play, but those are operational in terms of how those moves kind of stack up. But the plan is more, this is what needs to be taken into consideration. That's how I'm internalizing that. I don't know if that's what you meant.
And I think some of this came out of the feedback that Jason had provided, even that, like, we have, you know, certain activities that the board is going to take on, right? And for that specific activity is really coming out with a communication plan for it, that we would actually think about, you know, for our facilities or whatever, you know, this is the level of engagement, this is the type of engagement that we believe is important for that. And it, you know, may be a subset of the total laundry list of community engagement activities that we have. So it's actually specifying that there's a requirement that when we do have one of these activities, right, that we do come up and think about a plan of what we need to do for this specific instance, for this, and that's how I read that. It's putting the requirement on us to really think about it and create a communication plan for that particular item that we're working on, as opposed to putting it all in here. Yeah, Laura.
I'm seeing this sort of as an opportunity to say, like, these are the types of information we might need to gather, and then these are the ways that we can gather these different pieces of information. And based on the different scenarios that we have, which ones fit best, while having kind of all of these options laid out for us and already sort of built.
It's probably also, I'm thinking, Laura, a little bit on timing, like, I'm thinking of the policy committee and their work, right? So, you know, they're gonna have to think about C30, where are we going with that? So it's possible that if your community and engagement policy was already created, you might say something along the lines of, you know, if significant shifts in policy would have impacts on parents, right, that would be dramatic, then the policy committee needs to begin with input sessions prior to, right, you know, having, I don't know, I'm just making that up, but you know, that type of thing might be guidance that would be in a policy that then the policy committee, in this made-up example, could say, okay, this is a policy that does actually fit that bill, and so we're gonna take our approach to its development in a certain direction. So it's probably timing too.
Yeah.
Another discussion. Ron.
The way this is phrased, does it seem like it would also give us leeway to shift, if we wanted to, the way that we do public comment in this room during meetings? I guess that's a question for everybody. Because sometimes it feels like I'd rather have a discussion with the public rather than just kind of have public comment, move on to our stuff, and then not have a conversation. Does that make sense? Maybe that's not a good idea, but it's something we might want to think about.
So all of, you know, like if you go through, and you probably haven't had an opportunity to go through the training yet, I think it's on the 22nd, the School Board Association. One of the things that they really stress is that a board meeting is there for the purposes of getting board business done, right? It's not for the purpose of having two-way dialogue, and, yes, people can bring things to us in this designated amount of time. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have other vehicles, right, where we can have that. Like there could be a forum, there could, be where it's more two-way, right? But board meetings are very long to begin with, right? And to also have two-way conversation, there would be times that we wouldn't get any board business done, or we'd be here until midnight. If we look back across the last year or two, right? There's been things that, people have really purposely and understandably, wanted to engage more in. And so the discipline, I think, really needs to be there so that we can get the board business done. And then what's important is to work with this goal and figure out how can we get this other vital information as well, and not necessarily have that be at a board meeting per se. Mary Heather, then Tricia.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. I mean, this has been kind of a push and pull for a lot of board members, and I think it is important to recognize that board meetings are board work. And the fact that public comment is so limited underscores the need for this. To have a different way of crafting opportunities, to have back and forth, to have other ways of gathering input and not just having, output. And it's important for the board to recognize that we still have to adhere to our governance responsibilities, and it's very difficult to do that if we don't have a structure guiding us and keeping us on task for that. So I think, for regular board meetings, we have the opportunity, we have it twice a meeting, and we have a structure and a procedure for that. And I think this goal will help us craft a policy that sets the expectation that we will make other opportunities to provide exactly what you're talking about. I think changing and inviting, a sort of conversion of our governance structure, board meetings, to a public meeting is not necessarily holding up our responsibility to the public to stay on task and do our work. So I'll just say that.
Go ahead.
I kind of a parallel comment here. I just wanted to kind of point out what we're saying about shifting our view and internalizing communication and engagement. The way that we're talking about this right now is saying board meetings are for board work or board business, sorry. But we need to internalize the fact that community engagement is the business of the board. And so as we are making these comments and we're talking about these issues, I think it's also really important to think about how we're talking about it and to just kind of check your own internal biases and thoughts here, because the business of the board is to engage with the community and to be responsive and open. And yes, we have these responsibilities to move through our work, and there's a reason we have an agenda, and all of that is true. So part of, I think, this goal and this work over the coming years, figuring out the balance of those two things.
Yeah. Thank you, Tricia.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a motion. Any other comments? Are we ready for the question to be read? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the suggested goal, the ACSD board will adopt a community engagement policy that adheres to the recurrent AOE rules 113.1.1 and 113.2.3 and establishes a written communications and engagement plan for the applicable district/board work. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the goal has been adopted. Next, we have student academic progress and wellness. And the goal here is the ACSD board will define a process for public review of multiple measures of academic progress and student wellness. The process will include guidance on what success looks like, a regular reporting schedule, and development of board policy to ensure that student success and wellness measures are adequately monitored and addressed as needed for continued improvement.
That's a big goal. There's
Yes.
a lot of meat in there.
There is.
Can I, just to get the conversation started?
Yes.
Move that we adopt the ACSD board will define a process for public review of multiple measures of academic progress and student wellness. The process will include guidance on what success looks like, a regular reporting schedule, and development of board policy to ensure that student success and wellness measures are adequately monitored and addressed as needed for continued improvement.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Steve and then Jess.
So this was a point that we wrestled with a little bit in the Student Outcomes Committee, because we're looking at what is gonna be I mean, right now, the only thing that we do this with is basically VT caps. And that's it. And then what is this additional thing, and how do we do it? And looking at all the wonderful work that Courtney did with us to show us the assessments that the district currently uses, we're sitting here going, wait a minute, we got to pick one of these, and none of them really serve the purpose of doing this goal. And so I understand and really applaud the whole focus of this, but the devil really is in the details here. Do we feel like we're at a point to set a goal to say we're gonna have this by the end of the year, or whatever that goal is set? Because right now, it feels like there's a lot of work out there. And we're not the only ones working on this. I know the data committee or the data group is also working on stuff, so
So,
I feel it's premature.
okay.
It is my only concern.
Okay, and similar to the communication goal, in this particular case, what could happen is that the wellness committee could identify, well, for this year, here's some objectives towards obtaining and moving towards this goal. Nothing says here that, instantly you have this work done by specifying a goal, just like the communications, right? We have work to do, but this is kind of like that North Star of what we're trying to get to. And so what we could then do is then identify, well, here's like what we believe we can do this year, with the help of our new committee, and working with administration. And then the following year, we'll do some more.
So just as a point of clarification, would that then not be meeting this goal if we got to the end of the year and said, well, now we have a process to move forward? Because it very much says the process will include A, B, C, and it feels like we're not close enough to specify those things. So that's my hesitation on this.
Okay.
Not that we need to do it, we clearly need to do it. And as was pointed out in the meeting, it's not there yet as a district, let alone ready for the board to say, and here's how you can tell how your kids are doing.
Could you see a way to amend this so that it would allow for that continuation? I mean,
Could maybe the first sentence and then just stop there? Rather than to do, rather than to lay out the whys and wherefores of that scheduling, report scheduling, and that student success, that we're gonna be releasing that data to the public and it's gonna be monitored, addressed. I think that's the part I'm having, the second sentence is what I'm having trouble with, not the first sentence.
I can speak to some of the vulnerabilities that you have without the second sentence,
Okay.
if it's helpful. So right now, we have this wonderful learner profile, and we have approaches to learning, and we have commitments that we're making to what the daily work of students is, that our NEASC and IB reauthorization is asking us to codify and ensure that there's evidence of every day. That's done with the assumption that education should be driven by a set of values that underlies all of that. That set of values is people dependent right now. There's nothing in policy that says that those approaches, whether it is in partnership with IB or some other thing, you know, that articulates the same approach, that those approaches are part of what we value. So for example, if we had a teacher, we don't have this at all, but if we were to have in some other universe, a teacher that said, I believe that I can get great scores on whatever assessment by using drill and kill mathematics instructional techniques, right? And I don't have any policy right now that says to me that those are not the learning opportunities that we're providing for our students. And so the piece around, you know, how are we approaching this as a district, that would typically be in policy, and then ways in which we have a process for monitoring and talking about that. We're quite vulnerable without that, particularly when we start talking about district consolidation. Because of course where you go to determine what happens next is to the policy manuals. And how do we reconcile policy manuals, right? And think about that. I mean, you've all been through this before, you know, so that is something that worries me as somebody who's in charge of, you know, the operations of ensuring that the daily work of students matches the aspirations that are articulated. There's a missing piece there. And also, you could say, for example, the Student Outcomes Committee could recommend that the process for public review is that happens in the Student Outcomes Committee, and it happens as follows, and this is our work this year, right? You know, so you could kind of begin to think about that in a piecemeal basis until you get from where you are now to where you want to be to get, you know, I think where you're trying to go. I don't know if that's helpful.
Jamie. Oh, I'm sorry, Jess. Jess, you
It's
were
okay.
next, sorry.
That is helpful, because my initial comment was similar to Steve's, that it feels a little bit like a lot. Like I just can't see the Student Outcomes Committee moving at more than a snail's pace to be able to bring something significant to us, being the larger board, for like the better part of the year. So I wonder, but what you said makes sense, Dr. Baker. So I wonder why the piece that says development of board policy is like 3 lines in. Like I feel like that should be the lead, right? Is that we're thinking about a policy, because I can see how that could be done in tandem with the Student Outcomes Committee and the Policy Committee, and that policy is driving some of like the processes. But I don't know, so that would be maybe my suggestion or a thought on how to make it more, not concise, but tighter, I guess. Just because it feels like a lot as it reads now.
Okay, Jamie.
Yeah, maybe off that, it feels like a lot to me too, and I think the reason is because wellness and success are in the same thing, the same goal. And we have a wellness policy, first of all. It took like a year to adopt it, even though it's already written basically by the time we got it. And that is, you know, it's like health, it's very like, you know, about physical wellness, I think. I understand this is probably different, but it seems like, so what does it mean here that's different than that meaning? And it seems like success and wellness obviously go together, like in my head, but like if you asked, it seems like a double-barreled survey question, like are students succeeding and are they well? It's like, well, you wouldn't know how to answer that question depending on who's doing what. And it feels like two things to me a little bit. And like a policy on student, as I understand the purview of the Student Outcomes Committee is more focused on what we typically think of as student outcomes than wellness. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so it just feels like I can't reconcile why these two things are in the same goal all the time, unless I'm thinking of wellness in a way that is different than it's intended here.
Can I chime in from the back bookcase?
Sure.
I was having the same question, but then I started to wonder, when we were looking at some of our measures today in the Student Outcomes Committee, we were also looking at our social emotional learning data, our panorama survey data, youth risk behavior survey data, and Addison County United Way core results survey. And maybe that's what this means, because if it does, then I could see that making sense.
Okay.
But we also do have a committee looking at the wellness, staff committee,
Right.
looking at the wellness policy as it outlines we should. And by looking at, I should say, assembled and ready to look at the charge, and also waiting for district leadership staff to join to help lead the charge.
You're coming.
I see.
Mary Heather.
Okay.
And I know
Oh,
Suzanne
Suzanne,
can't
you put
what's
your
up, but
hand
then
up.
put it down, are you? I
Whatever.
have a feeling we might be saying the same thing, but the inclusion of both is grounded in the rules. And the district quality standard rules. So.
Is that rule here somewhere that I'm missing?
It doesn't look like it's
Um,
copied in for this one.
It's not, I didn't include it in that one.
Okay.
It was included in the first one because that one referenced specifically
Right,
those rules.
right.
But when the rule that we talked about, that the district would be adopting a vision and goals to support the continuous improvement and monitoring student academic progress and wellness. That's why
Oh, I
all
see.
of that is in
Oh,
there,
okay.
because it's in the rules, and this whole discussion is tying into the rules. So we kind of need to use the same nomenclature.
Okay.
And actually, some of the data that Courtney's referencing, combine them, and I realize that in part this seems overwhelming because we're at the beginning, right? So there's a lot of learning that's going on. But, you know, for example, our panorama software data takes a measure of a student's sense of self-efficacy. So, you know, cross-referencing a student's sense of self-efficacy with academic achievement data, right? That's where these things kind of begin to come
Right.
together. And I think the overall effort is to ensure that we are not narrowing our focus of what it means to be a successful
Succeed,
student.
right, yeah,
Exactly. You know, and you know, I think in that way they're in service to each other. There are parallel committees that are on the operational side that are looking at, you know, the Student Outcomes Committee today looked at a list of like, these are the different assessments that students take. And there's an assessment committee on the operational side that is looking at what are the questions we need to ask to determine, are these the right assessments?
Right.
And are they giving us the right information? When we have the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Restorative Practice, that query is going to, you know, expand greatly, right? Because that person is going to want to know, what is the data that tells us whether people are accessing opportunity equitably, whether, you know, the idea of success monitoring, progress monitoring, what do we know about students, and to what extent do we have some students that are invisible now? And who are those students, and what does that look like? That will be blown wide open. And that all happens on the operational side. the student outcomes committee can collect that information and kind of begin to think about, like the finance committee does. What does the board need to hear? What does the public need to hear of this? What's important to bring forward? And that's something that those of us on the operational side get completely lost in because we're in the weeds. So we need that balance, that counterbalance, that has a practitioner lens in terms of how do we broaden this conversation.
Suzanne?
So part of this goal is also going back to where the board was before COVID. And we used to get monthly, quarterly reports on almost every assessment that was done throughout the district. And the tying of the wellness, the youth risk behavior surveys, if you have students that are doing risky behaviors, they may or may not be functioning as well as you'd like them to do in class. So understanding both sides of the equation, actually there's more than two sides to any student's equation, but tying all of it in together is what makes a rounded student, and to be able to understand that data and where you're putting your money in your budget. And hopefully, it takes more than a year, so hopefully in a couple of years we'll start to see, I should say you will, because I won't be here, that you'll start to see the benefits of, the interventionists, the math people, the reading people, seeing those scores go up. But yeah, we used to always have wonderful reports, and Caitlin did numerous reports for many years for us. So it's getting back to that, having them on a regular schedule so that you can count on when you were getting this report, when you were getting that report, what does it mean? Is it different from last year or the previous year? Some of these assessments are only given every other year, so that you're not always assessing the same groups of students either.
And not assessing them in the same things because, reports written in Caitlin's era, right, kind of focused on many of the assessments that the Student Outcomes Committee looked at. What would be of interest, maybe, is if the Student Outcomes Committee gets to a place after it learns, right, kind of gets its feet underneath it, okay, well, could you provide us with data on the degree to which students are being assessed and developed as risk takers throughout our system? Our answer should be yes, hold please, right? And we will find that information and we'll get that information. If that's a priority, if that's a characteristic of a graduate, if you will, then we should be developing that intentionally, and we should have multiple measures, whether they're formative in classrooms or perhaps it's through fifth grade exhibitions or whatever it is. We should have ways in which we are tracking that. And it might not seem like a screener or something of that nature, but that should be on our mind of kind of where things are. And, those are that's maybe the ideal state, right? Where we get to that place where we're able to have some of those queries and we're able to pull those things together. And, that's gonna take us a little time.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor. Does anyone have, want to make a motion to amend? Do we need more time to think about this one? That's possible too. We can, make a motion to basically table it for now and bring it back for our next meeting. Steve?
I'd like to move to table this particular goal until the next meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Ron?
I mean, it is just a goal, right? I mean, we could also set a timeline for that. I think it's a good goal. I think some of our trepidation about this meaty set of goals, set of this kind of list that we have here is that it's a lot to tackle, but as goals go, I think it's a good one.
Okay.
So I'm not sure I'd be in favor of tabling it, but I wouldn't mind that either.
Okay. Jess?
I think one question I have is maybe to understand what is gonna come next. I don't know how we would bend a retreat doing what we wanna do on the first goal and
Right.
getting into this goal in a way that feels like doing right by either of them.
Right. And I was assuming that our committee that we have would really be the ones kind of coming back with the recommendation here, as opposed to having this as part of, the board retreat, since we just formed the committee. But please, if folks feel differently, yes, Jason.
I think it's fine to have this goal and it maybe becomes a 2-year goal, like, that's fine.
Right.
Like, I'd say let's get started and, yeah, I'm fine approving it now, but if the majority wants to wait until next meeting, that's fine.
And Laura?
I guess my question is hesitancy to vote on this, the fear of not being able to fully define a process within the next year? And if that's the case, does it make sense to, I guess, lighten the expectation within the first sentence by changing it to say, we'll work towards defining a process instead of saying that it will be defined this year? I mean, I guess that's a
Okay.
question for other board members.
Yeah. And so right now, we have a motion to table it, and Laura, I have to clear this motion first, I think, before we can go there. Steve?
So the reason that I wanted to table it is I would like some time to look at some different wording
Okay.
myself, to see if I could become more comfortable with, as Laura said, maybe softening some of the hard wills and do's rather than say that, to find some words to use in there that make this sound more like a 2-year goal than we will get this done this year. And that's the only reason that I wanted to table it, not that I don't agree with this goal.
Sure.
So,
That was basically my question.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
I mean,
Okay,
that was
Mary-
my motivation.
Mary Heather?
Perhaps what we can do is, obviously vote to table it, but in the meantime, similar to how we did this first time, anybody who, wants to independently suggest some changes, send them to the exec committee, and we can
Right.
show that and adjust it, show edits, and bring it back.
Yep.
So that we're using this week,
Right.
2
Yep.
weeks
Okay,
smartly and.
are we ready to take a vote on whether to table it, or do you want to say something more?
Yeah, I did want to say
Okay.
something more. If you are saying that we could change this goal, like within the next, like we're not setting this goal and saying that this is the one we're going to adopt, but we may change it, then I would withdraw my motion to table, because if it's subject to change by the board bringing it to the executive committee, or people bring it to the executive committee with different wording, that's adequate. And I don't think it's necessary to bring it up again if that avenue is open. So, rather than commit, to say it's either this or it's something else later, if this is still malleable.
Well,
then I'm-
sure,
I'm-
yeah,
I'm
but
good.
once we do a motion, vote on the wording, then we'll
Right.
probably get on with the work.
But I'm saying that I would be willing to withdraw the
Yeah.
motion.
Go ahead,
Well,
Jamie.
I hear Steve's point, but at the same, I was fine voting, but then Steve's like, I want to table it. I'm like, fine, we can table that. It seems like, are you on the committee, the student outcomes committee?
Yeah.
You are, right? I mean, you're on the committee. It sounds like this work will be in their purview for a little bit, and I appreciate that. But if we're gonna vote now and then change it by emailing the executive committee, but that doesn't seem like
No,
the
it
thing to do.
doesn't. No,
So it feels like,
That's
Yeah.
not
That-
what I was suggesting.
no.
that's not good, but that seems like what you were saying a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of was my understanding.
No,
I just
what
don't think
Mary
we can do
Heather,
that.
I believe, was saying is that if we do table it
Yeah.
until next
Then we can
meeting,
email.
that
Then
folks.
we can do that.
Yes, that folks,
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's
I
how I,
misunderstood then.
yeah.
I misunderstood.
are we ready for the question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Call it.
Table.
Thank you. All those in favor of tabling this particular goal until the next meeting, I'm not gonna put it beyond the next meeting, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll say nay, but
Okay.
it's my
Okay.
first single person vote.
Yay! Any abstentions? Okay, so we'll table this, but please, folks, if you can, send the executive committee any wording suggestions before our executive committee, which is next Monday, right? That would be great, and, you know, if you could get it to us, you know, by the weekend, that would be awesome. And then, we'll kind of pull all that together again and bring another proposal to the next board meeting. Okay? And last but not least, we have one other goal, which is a board member commitment / engagement. And it says, the ACSD board will establish and assess expectations regarding board member engagement, e.g. attendance, preparedness, participation in the annual superintendent evaluation process. Okay, Laura, Mary Heather, and then Jamie.
I move to adopt the goal as read.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay, discussion. Mary Heather.
I just wanted to provide context for this one again. This one kind of was born again from the minutes of our discussion from the last time. So it was something that had come up as an example, as an idea, and I'm the one who liked the idea. So that's my input in there. So I thought it was like just another good idea for establishing some kind of, I don't know, expectations. It could be folded into board member orientation, that sort of thing, just so that, anyway, that's where that came from, that's the context.
Jamie?
I was just gonna make a motion.
Okay. Tricia?
So, Mary Heather or anyone else who'd want to input, how do you see this playing with our board norms? Seeing as how our norms be fully present at the meeting, become familiar with the material before arriving, be attentive, you know, it seems like our norms cover a lot of these, so how do you see those two?
Suzanne's.
Okay, and so, well, first Tricia.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
that was a question.
Okay.
to-
I just see it as taking it deeper, for example, and I just yesterday got the survey from VSBA, but VSBA does the same type of work and they choose different standards to work on, and this current year, part of their member survey was about this very goal. So it was asking, you know, if you come to a meeting, have you read the minutes? Then the next one was, so do you think your counterparts on the board also come to the meeting having read the minutes? And so there was questions all the way through it, and then, you know, there was also some questions in there, I don't think they gave me those, but it was around the executive director's, evaluation process. So, it was, you know, seeing this goal, seeing what the VSBA does, I think it just takes it further than our norms, because our norms are our norms, which we are supposed to review at least once a year. But the survey and the goals part is really asking people not to put it out in, you know, not to sit there at a meeting going, I read everything, did you? But at the end of the year, you can say, yes, I make sure I read all the materials before I show up at meetings, you know, and, or maybe you don't, I mean, but it's asking people for their feedback in a kind of an anonymous way.
Steve?
And to address Tricia's question, the board will establish, and I think the key word there that has my support is assess. Because, you know, we just say, well, you're supposed to come here, and then
Right.
people don't show up.
Right.
And I think that's a valid expectation to say that we are assessing this as well.
Mary Heather?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it's just taking it a little further so that we have a mechanism for demonstrating accountability. And also, yeah, being able to provide some sort of survey data or something for, when we do our self-assessments. So I guess it's just formalizing it beyond just having our board norms on our website and sometimes in front of us.
Yep.
Also, I mean, you operate at a very high level as a board. I mean, you know, you have a lot of reading ahead of time. You have a couple of committees that you are committed to. You know, you are all so dedicated to what you're doing. And, you know, sometimes I think it's good to just articulate some of those things. Like, this is kind of what this board does, and just talk about that together. Like, is that doable? You know, is everybody having time to read all the emails or the updates or the whatever it is, or you know, is it getting to a bit of it, but maybe there are a number of people who are feeling like I'm not getting to as much of it as I need to be getting to, so we need to calibrate the work and the pace of the work that you're doing so that you're not only seeking one term, you know?
Right.
In that
That's
sense.
true.
So there could be some of that too, that's just, you know, how are you feeling and what feels reasonable and, you know, what is manageable? Because it doesn't feel good to not necessarily get everything read or done or, you know, that kind of thing, right? You know, especially if it's, I mean, everybody has lives and, you know, you're all volunteers sort of mostly, right? With families and jobs and other community commitments, and so just making sure that you have those open conversations is maybe an important part.
Others? Are we ready for the question? Okay. All those in favor of adopting the following suggested goal? The ACSD board will establish and assess expectations regarding board member engagement, and then in parentheses, e.g. attendance, preparedness, and participation in the annual superintendent evaluation process. All those in favor of adopting the suggested goal, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the goal has been adopted.
Bob, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Noticing the lateness of
Yes.
the hour and noticing that we have a employee and someone who's been waiting here very patiently for one item, I'm wondering if we could possibly move an agenda item up so that at least one person in our community could go home. I don't know what time he starts work, so.
Yeah. You know, technically, we're only, per statute, only supposed to make changes to the agenda at the beginning.
I know, but I didn't think we'd be this late.
Right. So, I guess what do folks feel?
There's gotta be some Robert's Rules thing on that sheet where we can do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm fine taking a break for public comment.
we can make a
Well,
motion.
it's not actually public comment.
Well, so what exactly are you hoping?
It's
do
for
next
the
meeting.
action on the flagpole. Move that one
Yeah.
up.
You could move to the facilities report first and they could start with that.
Yep. So there's just one more item under report of the chair that I would like to circle back to, which is do we wanna do potential action? So if we moved anything, I guess that could move after report of the board. So we come back to that. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So after we do the finance and the facilities, so I'm gonna move that.
Facilities, then finance,
Yeah.
then potential action.
Yeah, okay. And so then, so we'll do the facilities first. Sorry, this will mess your minutes up,
No,
Mary.
it's not a problem at all.
Okay. And then we'll do the finance update. So Jason, and we can do the flagpole first.
Okay, so, in the Flagpole community member donation agenda item, the facilities committee received a request recently from a community member who would like to donate a new flagpole to the Middlebury Union High School. So there will be 2 flagpoles. And they'd like the new flagpole to be used for the US flag and US flag only. And they would like the second flagpole to be used for the Vermont state flag and any additional flags that we would fly at the high school per our flagpole policy. So, if you're willing to pay for the entirety of the expense out of their own pocket, and that is it. So bring it before you for your review and approval questions. Did I miss anything?
Do you need to make a motion on this?
Yes,
since
we
it's
do.
an action item?
So I would like to move that we approve the acceptance of the donated flagpole at Middlebury Union High School, with the understanding that it will be used only to fly the United States flag.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Ron?
What is the current flagpole situation? There's only one, I gather, and what flag is flying from it?
So current flagpole policy that we have in the district says that we will fly the US flag, the Vermont state flag, and with a supermajority vote of the board, any additional flag that we deem qualifies for and aligns with our educational values and mission. Flag etiquette indicates that you must fly the US flag at the highest, and then Vermont state flag next, and then subsequent flags below it. As far as I know, we don't have any facilities where there's more than one flagpole, so when we fly flags, it's always multiple flags on the same flagpole. So this would be the only facility we have that I'm aware of where we would have a dedicated flagpole for, oh, maybe
There
The
you have-
field, the football field has
oh, football field has
flag,
multiple flags.
multiple flags.
Oh,
I think the facility fields also, but that's not owned by us.
Yeah.
right.
That's owned by the college.
Oh. Yeah, so this is at the round about the circle. It's a circle right in front of the high school, that's what we're talking about. Right now.
And so our just to clarify / restate, our policy already says we will be flying the US flag, so the only interpretation we're kind of cogitating on right here is whether having a dedicated pole is something that we are comfortable moving forward with.
You're actually required by law to fly both the US flag and the state flag. So the question is, so this opportunity is suggesting 1 pole or 2 poles.
Right.
You know, that's
Okay.
the whole entirety of the decision you're making.
Okay, all right, thank you for the
Yeah.
clarification.
Jamie?
What is the rationale for having 2 flagpoles and why only at the high school?
Donation.
I think the, Leonard is the person that is offering the donation, and so, it might be helpful for him to speak to the request, but I think it was basically presented that it would be nice for the US flag to fly on its own, and for the state flag to sort of fly on its own, and so this allows for significant attention to be placed, on the US flag without having another flag with it, which is certainly done in many other places.
Such as Middlebury College, right? When you go down 30, they have 3 flagpoles.
We have 3. Wow.
We could only hope to work up to that.
Yeah. Quite a goal.
Yeah, LA.
I would like to hear from Leonard about this. Is that something we're allowed to ask?
We could do that.
Business of the board.
If you would like to.
What was the question?
I'd just like to hear from you about this. Why you're-
The American flag to me stands for everything. And I was so heartbroken when they put the Black Lives Matter flag up on that pole. And matter of fact, I left the school for 6 months. And when it came down, I came back. And I just think the American flag stands for everything. And I would like to we're actually talking to Bruce, we're gonna put 2 flagpoles up there. Or we're gonna leave one there and put an American flagpole up there and put the other one with Mary Hogan because it's such bad shape. That said, it's why I wanna do this is because I feel that the American flag stands for everything. Anything and everything that you would want a flag to stand for, it stands for. And I would love to see that stand by itself. I know your policy right now has dedicated the federal flagpole for all flags. But if we put another one up I would like to see that one stand by itself, and whatever flags, if the board decides to put on the other pole. That's my goal. And I said, and I told Wendy that I would raise the money and make this happen all by myself. I mean, well, Bruce will help us where to put it, but I've lined up people to put the footer in, and I just gotta go raise the money. I've got 3 donations already, but I gotta raise the money for the rest of it, and that's why I wanna do that flag. I wanna do it badly. Matter of fact, I've waited a long time to do that flag. Ever since I went up there, I was heartbroken. And so, that said, I've been trying. And so I'm here tonight, and I was here at the Facilities Committee. I want to see this thing move forward. If not, then I'll just move on my way, and as a board, you can do what you've been doing.
Thank you.
Okay, other discussion? Jamie?
I guess I asked the why question, and I appreciate your response, because honestly, I didn't know. I'll just say, you know, I was very proud when we decided to fly the Black Lives Matter flag. I appreciate the students and their folks, their families who brought it forward. I especially am sort of, how should I say this? The idea that the American flag shares space with others, to me, is frankly like important. Like it's kind of the point also. And so I guess it feels like the rationale has something to do with dissatisfaction with the flying of the Black Lives Matter flag, in which case I would, I guess, argue that we should reject the idea. I'm not in favor of rejecting donations to the school system if that's what people want to do. There's plenty of good reasons why we would accept important donations, but it feels like we'd be accepting a gift that somehow denigrates something that our students and their families have frankly fought for and argued for. And to me that feels uncomfortable, I'd say, to put it mildly.
Tricia?
I don't pretend to know what everyone is thinking and motivations and thoughts behind all of that. From what Leonard had shared, I think could also be seen as, rather than against Black Lives Matter in particular, it is instead raising up the US flag, right? Not that, again, this is just me playing devil's advocate, or, you know, put yourself in someone else's shoes. But any flag would have been you're taking away from the attention and respect for the American flag, right? Not that it's the specific type of flag that went through a process, and I'm right there with you that I thought that was a well done example of student advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand kind of this as an almost compromise of, I, you know, really feel like the US flag should be able to stand on its own, and there, as we were saying, there are many places around town where there are examples of that. And I would have to look into flag etiquette a little bit more as far as what is best practice. So I do see what you are saying, Jamie, and also recognize that this is another example of advocacy within our community, and someone coming forward and saying, this is what, you know, I would like to see, and I'm putting money where my mouth is.
other discussion? Laura?
I just wanna point out that the request is not that there be another flagpole so that we don't fly any other flags, but instead so that we can keep the US flag separate. And that seems to me be a separate ask and not necessarily reflective of our thoughts as a board on flying any other flags.
I was just
Suzanne?
gonna say that, it was a long and lengthy debate over the entire flag policy. But I really find that this is a nice compromise. I think even when we discussed the flagpole policy, somebody had suggested this. And I think the comment at that point was, so now somebody wants us, the district, to fund a separate pole. So, in a way, thinking back, coming forwards, there are people that are willing to put money in to put up a second pole to fly the American flag, and the American flag only. And I personally see no issue with it. We have a lot of veterans in this town, in this community, in this state, that are very proud of the service that they have done for this country, and I think that says something to them as well. So I think having two poles, I don't find an issue with it. And I'd be proud to fly the US flagpole, on a flag on its own pole, if that makes any sense.
Are we ready for the question? Okay. All those in favor of accepting the flagpole community member donation, please indicate by saying aye.
May I, the wording was not just to accept the donation, but to only fly the American flag on it,
Okay.
because I believe that was a condition.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah.
How does it work? Do we just, like, is there any rule about, I'm not saying this is violent, but is there any rule about us accepting gifts?
Do we have a gift policy as well?
Like, can we just, like, I guess what's bugging me is that, and I appreciate you bringing this up, and I know it's like hard to come here and speak in front of everybody, and I appreciate that. The school, Mary Hogan School, when they flew the Black Lives Matter flag, organized a couple hundred kids and their families and community members to come out. And to fly that flag was like a huge community effort. And it feels different that someone just wants to pay for us to do it. And it feels like it's a public school. It feels like what else? Like it seems like, do we get a sense if this is a general, let's be honest here, there's like the symbolism of flags matters a lot to a lot of people. And people have wildly different opinions on it. And like to a lot of people, the flag stands for those wildly different opinions. For some people, they don't. And it feels, I guess I'm feeling uncomfortable with the fact that I'd almost rather us pay for it. If we're gonna have a policy about flying certain flags in certain ways, it almost feels like it should be a decision that should be community based. It should be publicly funded and accountable in that way. Like, what if years down the line, then it feels like it's Leonard's flag. And
I'm raising it from the community. I'm raising the money from the community. I'm not putting that money out there myself. It's all community work.
okay.
Yeah.
Like what?
Point of order.
Point of order.
Sorry.
Yeah, Jess?
I think just kind of in line with Jamie's original question about like a gift policy and setting a precedent, like if the community were to raise money for a flagpole and say we want to fly a specific flag on it. I don't know, like money coming in and a gift policy, like donations for designated things. I don't know how that works. I know like nonprofits usually have policies about that. I don't know if school districts do, but.
They do, school districts do have policies about that, you don't yet, but the policy committee certainly could take that up. Add that to its list of things to think about. You know, I think in this case, it's not a request to fly a different flag other than what you are legally required to fly. You know, it's separating the U.S. flag and the Vermont flag and saying that the U.S. flag will always fly on its own. So in terms of this particular request, this is not a request that would be out of line with any gift policy that you might, that having a little bit of a background in philanthropy, like that you might have. That said, a gift policy is an important thing. Where that often comes into wry are companies, right? That say, hey, we will give you the following if you'll do this, or we'll buy you a new set of bleachers if you'll invest in the, so that's kind of often what's happened, over time in school districts. I don't know the extent to which that's happened here, but it's a good thing to pursue, as a whole. I don't know that it needs to hang this up or not, but.
And we do have a flag policy that
About
talks
flags.
about flags specifically.
Not poles,
But not poles. But
Well, so
yeah.
it says, our policy says, the board may choose to fly an additional flag for a limited time that represents blah, blah, blah. This policy then would not apply to that flagpole.
Correct.
So we would have a flagpole policy that would only apply to some flagpoles.
But we have another flagpole to be able to fly it. It's not telling you what pole to put it on. It just is identifying what flag you can fly. Ellie?
Yeah, so I just want to make not a point of discussion, but maybe just more of a statement about this. I feel very aligned with what Jamie had to say earlier, and a lot of pride about the community coming together to fly these other flags. And I also really recognize that for some people, it was incredibly uncomfortable, and not just that flag, but many of the flags that we might want to fly with the American flag, I know will cause community members lots of discomfort and make them upset. And for reasons of like hearing everyone's voice and kind of trying to come to a place of unity and cohesion with community members who feel different ways, I think that this is a gesture that we can do that says, we hear you, we recognize what you're doing, and we want to try to honor that in a way that doesn't cause harm to anyone. Where, I think the same sentiments and efforts could be put into trying to change our policy or make it so we couldn't fly other flags, and this is not that. And I feel like it's a way that we could put out a gesture to the community that we're hearing everybody and we're trying to find a compromise that values everyone's voice. So I'm in support of the flagpole edition.
Okay, so I'm gonna read the question. And I have to find it now. Okay, the motion is, well, actually Jason, didn't Jason give a motion?
Mary Heather might have it too.
Yeah, why don't we do the motion instead of me making a new one up?
Basically, what I had written was move to accept the donated pole, but it was right after he had described
Okay, so it does need
the
more.
condition.
Okay, so I'm gonna reword the motion.
Should we make a motion to amend?
Yeah, let's do
Yes.
that. Go ahead,
So
go
I would
ahead.
like to move to amend the motion, to say that we accept the flagpole donation and the stipulation that it only fly the American flag.
Second.
Thank you.
I'm gonna add, if you guys don't mind, for MUHS.
Oh,
Okay.
Or at
At
NUHS.
NUHS,
At
displayed at
NUHS.
NUHS.
The hour's getting late, Mary Heather, so
Sorry, I
we'll all
just
help
wanna
you.
be clear.
mm-hmm.
And I wrote it down, but do you have it down? So do you wanna
Um,
repeat it?
Go ahead and read it.
Okay.
But Tricia, did you second it? Who seconded?
Suzanne.
I did.
Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne.
We have to vote on the amendment first.
Yep.
Okay, there's amendment to change the original amendment to, or the original motion to say, to accept the flagpole donation and the stipulation to only fly the American flag at MUHS,
On that pole.
on that pole.
We're doing great.
I know, and I have to write down the notes, otherwise I won't remember it. All those in favor of the amended motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Of amending.
Of the amended
Amended
motion.
motion, that's what I said.
Not in favor of the amended motion, but in favor of amending the motion.
And-
It's a verb.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, now we can go back to the main motion,
Which is now that.
which is now that. To accept the flagpole donation and stipulation to only fly the American flag at MHUS on that pole.
MUHS.
MUHS. Sorry, I can't read my writing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay. Any abstentions? So, what was the,
I
Was
we
8 to
did not
3.
do a roll call,
Yeah.
but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
9.
7, 8, there's 11, 10, 11, so 9, or wait, sorry. I
We've
didn't
got
count.
7
8 to 3.
8.
7 to 3, well, unless you voted.
Oh, did you?
I didn't vote.
Barb doesn't
Right.
vote.
I don't vote.
Unless there's.
So that's 7 to 3.
7-3. Okay, so the motion passes.
I'm sorry, I only had 2 nays, who was the other name?
There's you, Jamie, and Ron.
Jamie, Jess, and Ron.
Jess.
Oh, Jess.
Thanks.
Okay. So we can now do the Maple Broadband easement.
In your board packet, you have an easement text that is very similar to the Maple Broadband Middlebury easement. Fantastic reading.
But there's pictures.
More importantly is to review the placement of the easement physically and also the details of what will be put inside the easement area. So this graphic on screen shows the distance from the middle of the road and the distance from the northern property boundary. This is essentially 125 feet from the corner of Ripton Elementary School, kind of like off at the edge of the woods. The easement area is 25 by 25. In that area, I think it's a 6 by 7 concrete pad will be poured. Equipment will be placed on that pad. All the wiring and electricity will be run underground in underground conduit. To protect the equipment, they're going to put up these 48-inch bumpers, basically like these big steel horseshoes that are spaced out so that if a tree falls, it hits the bumper and not the equipment. And there's a good view of what the electronics look like with the bumper. So. This is like the 4th iteration of this. This is what we've landed on. So far, Maple Broadband has been very agreeable to agree to paint structures and everything with neutral and/or colors that will help it blend into the environment as much as possible. But the with the concrete, I don't know how you pronounce the word, bollards, that will protect the equipment pad from the parking lot, and those will be a highly visible color.
There was a feeling, Jason, I think I'm remembering that this is something that would benefit the community of Ripton whether or not the school remains in its current status or not. That's irrelevant to this question.
Yeah, this would allow Maple Broadband to serve the Ripton community and provide competition for high-speed internet access.
So when,
I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna make a motion that
Thank you, that's what I was
um,
gonna ask.
we accept or
Approve
the utility easement deed between Addison Central School District and Maple Broadband.
Second.
Any discussion?
My only question is there any setback requirements in Ripton that this may not be within its correct bounds from property lines? Okay.
It's all within the setback.
Was there any opposition to this at all from anyone?
I mean, when they were first proposing like this sort of god-awful concrete structure with I don't even know what they're reclaimed concrete blocks or
Okay.
something, that was like, you were like, whoa. But this seems
Okay,
palatable.
great.
I don't know how else you protect electronic equipment on the edge of a forest.
Yeah, okay.
Did you have a second to Suzanne's
Yes,
motion?
Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other discussion? Steve?
It says $1 and paid and other good and valuable consideration. I know that's legalese, but is there something other than $1?
Consideration.
Tote bag.
You get a sweatshirt.
Any other, it's getting late, I think. Are we ready for the question? Okay. All those in favor of approving the Maple Broadband utility deed easement, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's approved. Thank you. Next is the discussion and potential action on the capital improvement.
Did we miss a financial statement?
Can I make a motion that we table the agenda item to review the Q3 financials until next board meeting, when we're going to probably talk about it in a little more detail anyway?
Sure.
And give everyone the homework of just reading through the Q3 financials that's in your board packet and coming with questions.
Okay.
Second.
And Laura's.
Yep.
Okay. Any discussion on?
Aye.
Okay. All those in favor of?
Sorry.
All those in
I know how
favor?
to fix it.
All those in favor of tabling the Q3 financial discussion until the next board meeting, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. That will be on the agenda next time.
All right, for the next agenda item, we're going to talk about capital improvement planning process, specifically process B inside that process, and Matt is going to set the stage.
All right, thank you. So, ACSD is currently engaged with Truex Cummins Architects on the development of a capital improvement plan. This is intentionally different than facilities master plan. This is our engagement with them to focus on the highest existing need with regards to the deferred maintenance on our buildings, and to come up with a plan that's statutory requirements of the district to sort of have a 5-year outlook on how we are going to address those school construction needs, or repair and maintenance needs. And so that's the work that's happening in this process. We're looking at all schools. We are developing concepts for renovation. We are plugging it into that 5-year plan, and then we're also using this process to aid the district in determining the scope and scale of a potential bond-funded school construction initiative. So once the planning is complete, then we would say, how can we take those, take these plans forward into a potential bond initiative to find the money that would pay for them. So the capital improvement plan is split early on into 2 processes, A and B. And the reason for doing this was to optimize the efficiency of planning relative to the district's policy development. So in process A, focusing on Mary Hogan, Mums in the high school, 3 Middlebury schools. In process B, focusing on the other schools. Process A, because there was no policy needed to determine that the buildings in Middlebury were going to be used, could go to conceptual design right away. In process B, the planning is heavily influenced by the board's policy development with regards to attendance. And so by splitting the 2, we were able to prevent gridlock and kind of keep both going in parallel. In March, once the bids came back from architects looking to bid on this work, the board chose Truex Collins and then elected to move forward with only process A. There were 2 reasons for doing that at the time. One, it was cheaper, so we saved $90,000 by just doing process A at this time. As a refresher, the bid suggested kind of doing both of them simultaneously or within within sort of a closer time frame. Process B was therefore deferred because we needed greater clarity on school attendance policies. By deferring process B until a later time, we were able to sort of clear an indefinite runway for that policy work to occur. Meanwhile, lots been going on at the state level. And this chart sort of summarizes where we were in January with the initial AOE and governor's proposal, all the way up to what we're calling the implementation zone, where some of these existing models have new districts forming and some of the foundation formulas starting to kick in, and so, some sort of clarity around that future state hitting in FY28 to FY30. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We know it's going to happen somewhere in that realm at the highest likelihood, and we know where we are today. So in January, foundation formula kind of got launched as a concept. I won't go into too much detail on each one of these models for the sake of time here, but it's gone through a few different iterations. First, it went to the House where it became H454. H454 centered around class size minimums, consolidation around these 4,000 student districts. It also sort of retooled the foundation formula to reflect the current state of the cost of educating students and our current state of affairs. The geography, the existing buildings, the history, all of that kind of combined to say there might be this hypothetical model that the governor's proposal suggested, but we're not there yet. Here's where we are now. Let's do it this way. Currently, the bill is with the Senate, and it's again going through a new set of changes. So far, they've reduced the formula amount to a middle ground. They've gotten rid in some of the class size minimum requirements. And they've also added, some ambiguity with regards to what redistricting would look like, what district size would be in an ideal setting, whether or not school SUs exist, the future of tuition, private schools, etc. So all of which is to say more gray area than we had in the House version with regards to how we can plan for our buildings. Hopefully by June we'll have some sense of what the final version is going to be. There'll be a conference committee that follows the work of the Senate Finance Committee, which is where it is now. But we estimate that they are going to create some sort of foundation formula for statewide funding. We don't know what the district, school, and class size rules may or may not be. We don't know what board or state governance will look like. We don't know whether or not they're going to produce something in the legislature that's going to stand up to the governor's veto, ultimately. So, all of which is to say there's a lot of unknowns still. But we do know that if these things do keep the momentum that they have now, FY 28 to 30 is sort of that implementation zone. And if in that implementation zone we switch to a different governance structure where this board no longer has agency and ACSD doesn't exist as an entity anymore, we can take where we are now and where we would be then and look at it under this next chart, which kind of says, all right, what do we have left in between now and then? So this is it. We've got essentially 2 Januaries and 2 Junes to get work done that this board could hypothetically have, voting agency over. So, with regards to the money that's going to be needed to get any of this work to break ground, there are essentially 3 windows of opportunity to target for bond votes. There's 2 town meetings, one March of next year, one March of 27. Then we have a November midterm election. And so while you can put forth a bond referendum outside of those major voting days, it's unlikely that the turnout would be favorable for the sake of passing something. And so that's why we're kind of focusing on those 3. So that's the state context. Now we're going to go back to our process, our own district process. And the question was then asked, what about process B? If we don't do process B within this kind of time frame, do we miss the boat on having the same agency for this board to do work on all of our buildings, or to authorize work on all of our buildings? So what about if we put process B back in? What would that look like? We know that it would be an added cost somewhere in the ballpark of $90,000, which is what it seems by not doing it. We also know that it would come with the time frame constraint related to the policy work that needs to be done. Where do kids go to school? Go to school in their town, they go to school in other towns, et cetera, et cetera. You all know the conversation. So until that policy work is done, B is sort of in a holding pattern. In order to bring B back in, policy would have to charge forward under a tighter and higher priority timeline. That's it for the overview. Shortest presentation I've ever done. Give you some discussion, but I'm here to answer questions.
Questions, discussion, thoughts? Barry Heather.
I'll just point out, when we were discussing this in the facilities committee and kind of going through Matt's initial presentation, at least the takeaway I got was, if we don't move process B forward, we really do run the risk of missing the opportunity to do any capital improvements on our schools in the outer communities, which, in, you know, our initial planning in October seemed to make sense, given, you know, the policy work that needs to be done, and it's still, you know, we still need to do that policy work, but, we're kind of up against a much more compressed timeline and a much shorter runway, and it doesn't seem fair to students in our outer communities to not include, you know, the possible classroom areas that they would be attending in our broader planning. And this is, you know, kind of, I think, anticipating the possibility that ACSD will not have agency. The voters in ACSD will not have agency. We will not have agency in developing the learning environments for our students unless we take action and do construction within this improvement window, and which means we have to develop, you know, a bond proposal by one of those 3 dates that Matt suggested. So I just want to underscore the importance and urgency of making a decision, and I personally feel like it doesn't seem fair for us to forge forward with process A and not fold in process B and look at our other facilities as part of this broader district-wide work.
Matt, could you just back up to the calendar page real quick? That one, yep, perfect.
I will also add that if you're thinking about a bond vote, sometimes it's good to kind of put that on the horizon and work backwards. And in order to go in front of the voters, you need to know how much the project's going to cost. And in order to do that, you need to know what the concept's going to be and conceptual approval. And in order to do that, the architects have to do the work and present to the board. And in order to do that, the people who work in the buildings and the committees that help organize it all need to meet with everybody and send that. So, which is to say, like, you got to back up 6 months from each one of these dots to get to like where the starting point is at minimum.
At the minimum.
Then you're hustling to get the vote in time, right? So it's some of those things are an important part of like placing the work on this timeline.
Jess? And then Suzanne.
I just have a question. If we were to do this, isn't it also a possibility that like the bond vote can happen and we can approve it and then the new governmental body of those buildings says no? Like, I guess I'm confused about that and the idea that like we could, yeah, it could be stopped.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, that even if it's not stopped, that those buildings, they might decide, like say we start before it's stopped, then they could decide not to use those buildings. So I guess, yeah, I don't know. It's not really a question, or is that right, I guess?
There's a lot of unknown relative to the timeline, relative to, you know, rewrites of the legislation, closing loopholes in school construction projects possibly, and limiting the amount of runway that districts have to get votes through and to get the work done. You know, I think all of the models have so far sort of taken the stance that in a meld scenario, whether it's, you know, the Champlain Valley district from here to Canada, or, you know, a district model, or anything that's been thrown around, the entity's existing debt service and reserves become merged, right? And so if there's a 25-year bond active for the entryway at Mount Abe, all of our voters would inherit that debt as part of a merger with Addison. Virginia's just did a lot of work on their high school, right? And so like all of these things kind of come together in the new meld. It's just a question of whether or not you know, we could get anything through and what that would look like. With regards to like trying to pick the right spot to invest money smartly, intelligently,
Yeah.
It's very difficult, to know what that would look like.
I was just gonna say that the other piece in this whole timeline is, you mentioned, working with architectures and stuff, but there's also the state fire marshal that has to approve plans, there's the, towning zones, all of those permitting pieces that all have to be put in place before you can go for a bond, so there's a crap load of work, you might say.
Yeah, no, that's like 6 months is like a minimum that you
Yeah, that would be, Tricia, a lot.
I was just gonna say, I am torn between completely agreeing with Mary Heather and feeling like equity and being fair to all of our student learners asks that we look at all of the facilities and all the buildings and make a comprehensive plan. And I don't see any way we could get all of that done by March 2027, like to the point that it would need to be by March of 2027, and maybe it's completely different. I'm going off of the timeline that the library just went through for their bond process, and maybe education is faster. I don't know. But even just thinking about how this would need to start with the policy committee and working through a contentious policy and looking at what we've just discussed around community engagement and understanding that in order to do that the way that it needs to be done. I mean, I'm thinking, Wendy, your Bridport and Shoreham discussion was a 6-week time period, right? That's just for the discussion portion, let alone then wordsmithing and drafting and approving, and so we're looking at a few months on just the policy itself, and then it's putting out to bid the various steps. And so I don't know. Yes, I hope that Jason would have better information on that than I would. But so I'm torn between these two things of what I want to do and feel like is right to do, and I guess really the question of what happens if we say yes, we're going to go with B, and then there's just no way that we can make it by the deadline.
Okay, Steve, and then Jason, and then Ron.
So my hesitation about moving forward stems from two things. One is the Career Center's $8 million bond, and it has tied the hands of the board to be able to cut anything. We are debt servicing, and boy, that puts you up against the wall about paying for things and stuff like that. And that's an $8 million bond. I believe to renovate the kitchen was $4 million. That's just to renovate the kitchen in one building. So we're not talking about an $8 million bond here. We're probably talking about closer to a $20 million bond. So that really puts a knot in my stomach. The second thing is that both versions of the education reform bill that are going through now are saying 300 student schools at the minimum. The House bill drops from 400 to the Senate bill to 300. If we're going to need money to make a school able to hold 300 students in the rural community, we are really tying our hands if we're putting in renovations in schools that are going to close. Those are the two things, the two uncertainties in the future that cause me to pause on this. And once we get this bond, as you say, it may get adopted that we have to, or that the consolidated district, whatever it looks like, gets that debt. Maybe, and we don't know that answer either. And the third kind of thing to I guess to think about is not only from a financial standpoint, but when we are going to ask for a bond of this size, I don't know that the will is out there to do this. So especially with all the uncertainty in the air about all these things. So for those three reasons, I'm gonna have to see a lot more information before I would support this. I understand the motivation to say, you know, that there's some, I don't know that the need is desperate, but there are some things out there that need to be fixed. But I think this future is far too uncertain for us to start moving forward and starting to throw $90,000 at this already. To, you know, to look at schools that may not, if you look at B, RES is on that list. Are we gonna make renovations to RES when we don't even know if we're gonna be using it? Because when you look at the list of B, Ripton is on there. So, I hear what you're saying, Mary Heather, and I hear what you're saying, Jason, and all you guys on the facilities committee. Yeah, you're gonna have to convince me a lot more.
Jason?
Well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because we have no idea what a bond would look like, how big it would be, or what the scope of it would be. The ask tonight is to consider moving forward with a planning process that would include our rural schools. At the same time, we're signing up for some fairly aggressive policy work. So if you're on the policy committee, you gotta know. You gotta be in agreement with this, because you can't do one without the other. So those two things are what we're asking about tonight. We do not have to decide this tonight. We cannot wait 6 months to make this decision, because that will be too late, right? As best we know, with all the uncertainty, it will likely be too late. The risk of it being too late is much greater 6 months from now than it is tonight. But if we want to, given the late hour, bring this back up at our next meeting, which we may have a full agenda for already.
I think we do.
It's not gonna break the bank in terms of this, but we're just asking to start the planning process in conjunction with the policy work that needs to go with it. And the end result of that might be no bond, nothing, that we say like, oh, that's what it's gonna cost? Nope, we're not doing it. That could be the end result. But to even get to that point, to get the information, we gotta engage a team of professionals to do that.
Ron?
I was just gonna ask an informational question, like, are these, like, how much of this is statutory requirements of what we need to do to upkeep these schools and just basic maintenance? Is that what the question is? Like, are we asking ourselves, do we make the money happen to make these schools meet just basic requirements?
No, we already maintain our facilities beyond what is required. What is required is to have a 5-year capital improvement plan, which we do not need architects to help us do. We already do that, on a rolling basis. Bruce and his team have a whole list of things that they have outlined that they can do. But in order to do something that is more substantial than just the ongoing maintenance and renovation, we need to have something that's a little more cohesive that we bring to the voters as a body of work and ask for their support and move forward with the bond. And I will say, it came up before I meant to mention that the debt service is crippling, and can be crippling. That is true. You know what else can be crippling? Is when you spend $5 million a year on renovation and repairs of aging buildings, right? So it's actually a lot cheaper to build a $50 million building and finance it over 30 years than it is to spend $5 million a year on repairs.
I also think, to Ron's point, there are buildings in the district that do not support suitable programming. Cornwall is the one that came up most dramatically in the facilities master planning process that the board engaged in 2021. Is that right? 21? Something like that?
19,
20.
Yeah.
20.
COVID years, during the COVID
Many
years.
Exactly. So we do have some of our surrounding schools that that we need to determine, are we going to give them attention beyond, as Jason pointed out, the sort of basic maintenance and whatnot that goes on, and depending upon what the cost of those are, you know, and the community engagement that goes around what the options are relative to that, you may be able to come to some decisions together, you know, about what you're willing to recommend or not recommend. I think to Matt's point, it seems likely that your window for having agency over those decisions, which could mean there's no school in a community. And therefore, there are designated options in other communities that those kids take. That window seems as though it now has a bit of a shelf life, which oddly enough, in October, wasn't on anybody's radar screen.
Right.
So, just to put it in context. Yeah.
Mary Heather.
And similarly, I think if you add the layer of all the activity that's been happening in the state legislature, not only is the window of opportunity to have agency over this kind of limited, but in some ways, this is our opportunity, if you will, to position ourselves, or I guess I'm sort of seeing it this way, I don't want to speak on behalf of the committee, but potentially it could be our opportunity to position ourselves to have buildings that can receive and serve a regional role, like at our secondary schools. And particularly because we have a technical education center attached to our school, and some of the thinking around how new districts might be organized in this, sort of redistricted model for the state. Some of the thinking has been, to have these CTE centers serve as sort of gravitational poles that, because students are already going there from other locations. So in some ways, this process allows us to be thinking about how might we not only provide better learning environments and address some of the more immediate things like at Cornwall, for example, so that our students, so that we are deciding to provide our students, the 21st century learning that we want them to, or learning environments that we want them to experience, but that also, perhaps we are building capacity to position ourselves well, I think, in a broader sort of discussion about redistricting. And I think it's potentially easier if we have facilities that offer something to have a little bit of, something to bring to the table when those conversations happen.
Laura.
I just want to say that I think the policy committee already has this lift. I don't think there's any extra lift to the policy committee. We're already talking about this pretty seriously.
Oh, no, I know what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, I agree that, I think if we don't at least start engaging in a planning process around this, or at least considering it, we're missing an opportunity. I'm not saying it has to become a bond vote, I'm not saying that it is gonna turn into something, but if we don't look at it, we're missing an opportunity as a district. Whatever that looks like 3 years from now, plus.
Jess?
I was just gonna say, does it, because this has to move in tandem with the policy committee, does it make sense to come back to this our first meeting of June when we'll know if H454 has class size minimums put back into it? Like, it won't be a clear picture at that point, but I think that they'll probably work out some of those very basic pieces before the year's over.
I don't think the class size minimum really is driving this. It's really the state of our buildings and the policy that we currently have. And, really how to use what we have to educate the kids that we have in the best way in our elementary.
Oh,
Yeah, so
I guess I thought that our
the only
policy
thing
work
that
would
the new bill does is it puts on the horizon when we won't be the individuals making that decision as to what is gonna happen with our schools. And, ironically, the school that has the most kids in the rural community right now, which is over 90-some kids, is probably in the worst shape. And, which is kind of a hard, thing, so what do we do in the meantime?
Just on the policy stuff, I'll just say that I listened to the meeting and I guess I get the feeling that the order of operations will be that we decide on a process like this, and then we make policy changes accordingly. Potentially. It doesn't, I guess I'm confused the extent to which those changes are potentially intertwined throughout the process, or will policy be more or less reacting to what are potentially just fixed realities of school what's the right word, not quality? Condition. Yeah. Is that the idea that the facilities committee has?
Well, I mean, I think yes and, right?
Okay.
Like there's certainly the policy committee work on attendance boundaries and kind of thinking about where can we and how can we create schools that are receiving, that can be sustained by a sustainable enrollment, right?
Right.
So there's that. Also, there's the element of, yeah, we've got some buildings that are in real rough shape. And that, those issues kind of create more urgency in those buildings. We have to decide which buildings we're going to invest in. Part of that's gonna be what's the cost of repairing them, but also, what's the likelihood that, we can create a catchment area that's gonna send sufficient number of kids there to make it worthwhile.
I see what you're saying.
The two kind of go hand in hand. I will say one thing that we discussed at the facilities committee that Bruce brought up is, because there's definitely concern, I share this concern about us trying to get it all done before town meeting day 2026. Like that is a huge lift. And so, one possibility would be to, buy us more time and aim for the midterm election instead. And Matt, jump in if you have thoughts about this, because we were all discussing this at the committee. That's gonna definitely bring probably the most voters out. So there's some argument for push, but obviously that makes our actual implementation window and runway shorter. So one thing that Bruce suggested was, we might contemplate, identifying some very high priority projects from process A and kind of put those up for a vote, kind of fly under the radar with a smaller number, I guess, if you will, for the first, the town meeting one, and then, that gives the policy committee a little more time to do its work, and the architects and whatnot a little more time to respond to the input to their work, so that we could be aiming for the second, the midterm election day for process B.
Right.
I mean, these are, again, kind of theoretical discussions, but we're just trying to sort of, these are the limitations, the guardrails around what we're trying to do. These are the options, but like Jason said, we can't move forward with any of it if we don't take an action on elevating process B into part of that work.
So, and just a quick, process B is asking the architects to get us some conceptual design work on other buildings besides the library. Bond strategy and timing is all after that, right? And so, whether or not bond strategy needs to be considered in this conversation, it does obviously because it's like part of the timeline, but it's not even a consideration if we don't have something conceptual from the architects to show you all.
Laura, you had your hand up.
I just was gonna say that I think a recommendation from the facilities committee about what schools we invest in doesn't need to happen before we can work on the policy stuff. We can work on the policy in terms of deciding what, what the overarching policy
Yeah,
is
yeah,
gonna be,
yeah.
and then identify whichever buildings we need to from there, but.
I also think they're iterative, right? Like, I mean, if Cornwall is a $30 million replacement, no, I don't know this from experience, but it seems that everyone feels that it's a full replacement, it's not a renovation. If that's a $30 million replacement, and the only way we qualify for state aid for that is if it actually takes into account many more students.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So now it's a $40 million building. You know, it could be that you say, okay, that's not where we're going, to Steve's point, you know, that's not what we're doing. However, I would recommend that you are not leaving students in Cornwall indefinitely. So, you know, that would mean
Right.
that you are now essentially saying that that building is going to cease in operation if
some
you are
point,
not
right,
going to,
right.
well, I mean, like shortly, you
Shortly,
know,
okay.
like, I mean, if you're not going to spend the money in it, which I could see both, you know, arguments on both sides for that, then where are the kids going to go to school in a place where their gym isn't also, you know, where the music stands are, and you know, right, and get beamed by a dodgeball as you are walking, you know, into the, I mean, there are a number of things there that are, they're just, they make for inadequate programming. So that's an example of, you know, that's a definite choice point that impacts policy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
on some level is like, what do people want to do with this kind of thing, right? Does everybody want the bright, shiny new building that is $40 million? If so, then you can proceed forward and move that on. If they don't, if that's really what the public sentiment is, that is not what we are going to do, then it becomes, you know, what happens with Cornwall, which is the same as what happens with other towns where they do not have, you know, a school in that town, right? So they are an iterative work together process. And I think that became clearer the more we worked with the architect and the more we started to consider the conversations Bruce is a part of at the state level in terms of what really we would have the option to consider. Yeah.
So I do have a question. What would be the deliverable, you know, for the 90,000 extra? And the reason I ask, I know drawings and stuff like that, but you know, there's the Cornwall School. Does it include replacement? Does it include, if we wanted to do some consolidation work, here's a footprint that could house 200 kids, I'm just making up numbers.
So,
Yeah,
I think it's easy to say what it wouldn't include, which is what it did the last time.
right.
And you know, presentation by the architect, telling people on different ways that they could be configured. And I think that there was a you know, real pushback to that feeling of just being a dot on the map. And so I think we've, from the get-go in this process, taken the lead and looking at our communities much closer and guiding the work to suit the best interests of everybody. Which is to say, the deliverable would be whatever you wanted it to be.
Right, and then my question is, in order for them to do their work, right, we need to be telling them, these are the scenarios that we want you to, you know, cost out and come up with architectural designs. And that part, I'm not hearing how we're gonna get that done in a timely fashion under this current contract with them. And that could just be me. I just wanna know how are we gonna do that important work to decide, well, this is what we'll get for our $90,000, you know, so that we can make some decisions. Does that make sense?
The process is set to kind of culminate in September. I don't think that, I haven't sensed from Truex that they wouldn't be able to kind of continue the engagement deeper into the winter time to fit B, and even though their original timeline that they suggested was more concurrent than that. So I don't think that, 2 to 3 months of like heavy duty policy work would break the timeline, but as somebody else said, I think 6 would be too far.
I just want to reiterate again that the policy work done outside of this is incomplete. Right? If you, because the decisions sort of impact each other.
Yeah,
You
right, I
know,
see what you're saying
The,
now, yeah.
the policy work on its own over here is a theoretical exercise. When you are talking about 90 kids in Cornwall and the architect's information about what's gonna be needed for that building,
Yeah.
now you can begin to have community engagement
Yeah.
around, okay, what direction are we choosing here?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And what does that look like and how does that impact attendance boundary policies? Because if the community engagement is, if it were $100 million, we'd wanna do it twice, then, then you know what you're doing on some level, you know, because your community will tell you what it is that
Right.
they believe should happen in this short period of time, arguably, that we have, where you are the sole body that can take care of all of the kids and see that they're properly placed, you know, in buildings that are all equally supportive of their learning, so. Yeah, so they really do go together, because if the answer is we wanna have an alternative to a replacement building in Cornwall, or replacement building that is Cornwall plus.
Yeah.
All right, well then what is the most viable financial alternative to that for 90 kids? What needs to happen in
Right.
order for that to work? Does that mean there's a Weybridge addition that needs to happen to allow their septic system to be at a different place so that they can get other students? Is Mary Hogan fine with that? Do we have a third place, you know?
Right.
What happens with Salisbury? Can they take additional kids, you know, in addition to what they have now, or are they capped out? I think these are the kinds of things that, if you don't know the answers, it's hard to determine attendance boundaries when you don't have the financial pieces with it too. You know, I think that's the realization that we came to.
And that kind of gets to my point. You know, there's certain scenarios that it really sounds like we really need to know, well, what would this cost? What would this cost? And I was just really asking, how do we come up with that direction to make sure that we're getting what we need to make the decision? And so that's what was on my mind. That was behind my question. You know, us approving the 90,000, that's just one, that's one aspect of it, but it's what we get for that 90,000 that we've thought through, right? And that's a part I'm wondering how we come up with the decision of those scenarios. Ron?
I guess I'm a little confused, like, we keep on talking about what policy has to do in order to make this work, or understand what we need, or what we can expect. But does that just basically mean, if I'm understanding correctly, like, educated guessing what policy is gonna be at the state level, and then seeing how we fit into that?
It's our C30 policy, Ron, thanks for the question. That's the one that is school attendance boundaries. Right now, it says that students will attend school in their towns.
Thanks.
So that's the one that we're
Right.
speaking of.
I'm getting the sense that we need to think about this more, right? I think this was good discussion, but I don't think, unless I'm wrong, we can really make a decision tonight. Yes, Laura?
Can we ask the facilities committee to come back with a list of exactly what deliverables we would get from the spend of the $90,000 in order to make the decisions,
Or what scenarios?
Right. So that we could move this forward in a fairly timely manner, but also have all the information we need. Is that realistic?
The one thing, like, you could look in the RFP for Truex and see what their deliverables were, and those all relate to what we asked them to put in there, and so that it's kind of a rough outline of like how the process would unfold, X amount of board meetings, concepts, all the things, but, I think, again, from the that we've done with them so far, get the sense that if you engage an architect, pay them a lot of money and point them in a direction, they are gonna do it their way and give you the standard deliverable package that they would give any school district. And 9 times out of 10, that's probably really well received because the school district has somebody who's a professional standing up and saying, you do it this way, bop a little about, shiny diagrams, you know, charts showing that it's gonna not cost as much as you think it was gonna cost, all those things. But we've also done that, and we realize it's not the right thing for us at this time. And that's why we're really focused on like, what do we want them to prepare for you?
Right.
And what do you want? That's the chicken and egg kind of thing, right?
It's really, what are the questions that we need to address, right? How are we gonna make decisions? And what data do we need, you know, what diagrams and cost data we need?
And what we will get for that is zero work done on models that don't interest us. Or
Right.
don't have no legs in the board to get exactly the things that you ask for with the maximum amount of like care, consideration, and design and creativity in those models, because those are the ones that represent the interests of our district.
Mary Heather?
Oh, well, I was gonna say, I mean, like, essentially what you're asking for, Barb, is what, that sort of initial question that the facilities master plan process sought to answer, like, what is the state of our facilities, what, you know, give us a collective inventory of our collective facilities, what do they need, and what is the sort of renovation potential for each of these places, so that if we need to shift and you know, what was generated from that was very broad brush, very non-specific, like Matt was saying, you know, and what we need is something much more detailed about our current, like, here's our current situation, like Cornwall, we have these number of kids here.
Well, and I agree with that.
You know.
I agree with that, but what I'm missing is what detailed drill down scenarios are we gonna look at? Are we gonna look at, well, every school and what it would take to renovate it? Probably not. So how do we pare it down to Cornwall, extending Cornwall and whatever?
So-
That's all I'm asking.
I mean, one thing I would say is that, you know, Cornwall is the only building that I would consider closing for its condition.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
And that's fair.
Yeah, so, I mean, we may have other buildings that aren't as pretty as others or whatnot, but Cornwall's condition impedes its programming. We're now having the principal think about putting an office in the vestibule. Right, in some way, in order to be able to alleviate some of the challenges that are going on there. So this is a capital improvement plan, so we need to determine what is the cost of improving that building.
Right.
I think in short order, right, and is that cost, I highly doubt the state is going to allow us to bond to build a new building in Cornwall alone, or, I'm making an assumption, heavily renovate, dump tens of millions of dollars into a building for 90 kids, when near it are other schools that would be small by choice, not by necessity. So that means that in this guiding these discussions, right, we need to know what is the cost of improving that building.
Right.
What is the cost of improving that building so we are most likely to get some form of state aid, you know, which is gonna mean expanding it, you know, in that way. And you know, the board needs to process that,
Right.
you know, and determine, what does that mean? Is that something that you are interested, or the community, through a proper community engagement process, how do people respond to that? You know, it could be that there are people in this community that say, you know what, it's about time that all of the kids that would be attending such a building got a nice building, because everybody else has nice buildings, and we're all paying for Burlington High School, right? So, you see what I'm saying? There may very well be that attitude in our community, and that is, you know, the path that we need to be taking, you know, down that road, in which case the policy committee is kind of thinking about, okay, then this is what that attendance boundary would change to, you know, if we go ahead and do that bond. There may be absolutely no appetite to spend tens of millions of dollars anywhere. If we begin process B a month from now, we will have that information. You know, and then you can begin to process that information with your community in terms of, okay, what does that then look like? And then the community process says, well, we don't really want to spend that money, we want to look into the following things. Well, that begins to guide, you know, the process.
Yeah, so this helps. So
Okay.
it's an iterative process where we start with the obvious, which is Cornwall.
Right.
And see what it takes to, you know, renovate versus build a new or even add on to.
Improve the facility.
Right. And so that's different than just, you know, having a list of all the schools up there. And then going from there, if we need to.
That would be my recommendation. Yes.
So I wasn't hearing those exact words, so I was, you know, in light of what Steve had said is true, we have a list of all the schools there, but that's not the intent. So I think we have to be clear of kind of our intent. And that was all my babbling was about.
Yeah, all the schools are there because that's the inventory
Yeah.
and there's interconnectedness, right? If there is no rebuild in Cornwall, it might be, you know, a new project
Right.
that emerges in Ripton
Right.
or Report. Everything's on the list because those are our buildings.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I was just needing, you know, wanted it to be clear that it's, no, we have really specific ask of them. And starting with, you know, really Cornwall is that main ask, right? And so,
That's the epicenter.
yeah, that's the episode. Does that help Steve a little?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, so do we want to table this discussion at this point? We don't have a motion on the table, so we don't have to vote on tabling a motion. Does that feel right to everyone? And then, as you're right, this next meeting, we already have a full agenda.
See, the policy meeting is tomorrow, and C30 is always on the agenda, so we'll be talking about it.
Okay.
So you'll have it done by Thursday.
We'll go by Thursday, yeah. By the time the other bill comes out of the,
Strong work.
yeah.
Okay, so, it is so late, guys. I do want to circle back up to H454. Do we, as a board, want to do anything? We know that there's a really tight window. And focus on, you know, like, you know, making sure that we use Tammy's, Colby's proven statistics, right? Special ed, I would throw that in there, that, you know, are you gonna fund 100% of special ed is important. There might be a couple other things that we would wanna include that's in that, you know, we could pull from the VS, you know, that combined V's document, or not.
Are you talking about a letter?
Yeah. It would have to be basically, I think, turned around in 24 hours. Yes.
I think it's a great idea if someone has capacity to make a draft, and I say that because I don't have capacity to make a draft in the next few hours.
Yeah.
But I would love if I did.
So what does others think? Is it something that if we, I don't know, I could work on it, Mary Heather, would you have any cycles?
I don't have a lot of capacity.
You don't have a lot of capacity.
I would almost say that if board members want to write in with their comments and suggestions and don't forget this and don't do this, that we should leave it at that because
It's,
I don't have capacity
Yeah,
to even read a letter tomorrow, to be honest.
yeah.
And if Mary Heather's maxed out and Jess has already said that they are maxed out, so, you know, sounds like people should, if they are so inclined, should raise the ante by raising voices.
Jason?
Do we have this in electronic format?
Yes, I can send it to you. I think,
That'd be great.
I found it on the, their website,
Oh.
their documents, not their, I just happened to notice it there today, but I was looking at documents for Monday for the finance, Senate Finance Committee, but I'll pull it,
We found it on the Senate website.
yes.
Oh, okay.
I'll pull it and I'll send it to everyone tonight,
Okay.
because that's actually a good guiding
Mm-hmm.
document for people. And if you do send it, make sure that you send it to the entire committee. Yeah, and not just Ruth or whatever.
And when you send something, I'm not sure you can send it saying that you're a board. Say that you, ACSD board at the bottom of it, say it's a private citizen, because you can't speak for the board.
However, you're a board member.
You can
Yeah.
say, but
You
you're
say in a
not,
letter that you're a board member,
but you're
don't
not
say it.
speaking as a member of the board. Okay, and so that's great. The other thing is, there's this email going around, with different chairs, right? Wanting to have coffee. Obviously, one can have coffee. And I was wondering what folks felt for me to participate in this with the other chairs of the 4 districts, in Lincoln, Mount Abe, us, and Addison Northwest, with the understanding I do not speak for the board. It would just be more listening. I mean, they need to be soliciting as well. I would come back and basically say things like, well, I think we need to be looking at more than just our districts. We should be looking at the entire county, right? I agree with that. It helps with the sparsity, it helps with, a lot of things. I'm not sure it's gonna go anywhere. But I do believe, they think they can get ahead of this, but it would be nice to know what they're thinking. What do you guys think?
What exactly are you asking, Barb?
If you have any problem with me doing this, or you think I shouldn't do it, participate.
Having a coffee meeting with other board
Board
chairs.
members, and specifically around this topic. And I understand fully that, I'm not gonna put a position out there that we haven't talked about.
It's fine by me.
This is just board chairs?
Yeah. Okay. I just wanna be full disclosure, and I, cause I'm just a chair, I'm not anything special.
I'm just a simple cave man.
I know.
I think it makes sense to just, see what our counterparts are saying and thinking. And
Yeah. Yes, okay, so, and anything I learn, I will share. The other thing I wanna remind folks, the 27th is our next board meeting, which is a Tuesday, because the 26th is Memorial Day.
And Barb, on that
I
topic,
think I must have gotten it wrong.
just kind of looking to the future, we're wrapping up tonight's meeting.
Yes, maybe.
Our next one's on the 27th. Then we've got June 9th and 23rd.
Yes,
And then we typically break for July.
Yep.
yeah, yeah, and in
So
there.
3 more meetings.
Yes, and what we need to do is figure out when we might have a retreat over the summer.
Also, there's graduation.
Yes,
Yep.
which is the 7th,
I've already sent in my registration.
yes,
I have a question about that.
yes.
There was an email that went out that said, asked us to confirm if we were going, cause they were saving seating for the
Yep.
board, but I have a child that's graduating, so I'm going
Oh, you're good.
for him, so I say I'm not coming for the board, so you don't save me a seat there?
Right.
I'll be sitting with my
Right.
family?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can sit with your family, that's quite all right, Ellie.
Or you get there at 0:30 and just reserve seats right behind the board. You're like,
2 days in advance, maybe.
yep.
Okay. Any other questions around those topics that we just covered? Next is the second public comment period. There's no public in the room, and
Too many people made it to the end.
Yeah. And
Props
is-
to you guys.
is anyone interested in making a public comment that's on Zoom? Please raise your Zoom hand if you are. Okay, seeing none. I think maybe we'll skip board reflections. Oh, Jason.
Got one thing, you all received an electronic copy of our audited 2024 financials. I have a hard copy, if anyone would like a hard copy. If you prefer the textual reading, you can put this on the bedside.
I've already read it, so.
You have to cover to cover, so, choose if you want.
Okay. Jason.
Jamie.
I mean,
That's
Jamie.
Jamie. That's
Okay.
Jamie. That's
I'm
all right.
sorry, I'm
Jason
tired.
was the last
I'm
person who
sorry.
spoke.
I would just, as a reflection, I would just like to reiterate that I am completely shocked that we did the flag thing. I think it was completely the wrong decision. I think it will blow back in our face. When the BLM flag went up in Mary Hogan, we received a lot of communication from like really outright, outspoken white supremacists who objected to the flag. They didn't want it there. They expressed the exact same emotion, the exact same uncomfortability that we heard tonight. And it was weird at a meeting where we talked about community engagement, we talked about this and that we just let someone come in, offered us a check to fly a flag with a new pole or whatever. And the high school, we didn't talk to students, we didn't talk to faculty, we didn't talk to community members. And it's like, it's a pretty controversial thing. And I'm sitting here the whole time just completely shocked that we did that. And we gotta assume that people are gonna raise issues that will cause resentment, it'll be anger, they'll talk about public-private stuff. And I just worry that it sets a really bad precedent. What if there are people in our community that can't afford to raise money to fly a flag that they want to fly? Like, it just seems like an obvious equity and diversity issue that we just let go. And I can't let it go. So I just wanted to voice that concern before we leave here and say how dismayed I am that we made that decision, especially in such extraordinary haste, without looking into much of the matter at all. That's all.
Laura?
I just want to say that you can be very pro flying the Black Lives Matter or any number of other flags that you want flown or believe in the message of, and also understand why community members might desire a flagpole specifically for just the United States flags. And I think saying that we're willing to be okay with a second flagpole being raised in front of at the high school
Yes.
does not in any way, shape, or form suggest that there is anything other than good things to be said for flying other flags in front of the high school as well.
Mary Heather?
I second Laura's sentiment. I was very moved by the times we have flown Black Lives Matter flags and fully supportive of that. I struggled with this a while ago when this was first proposed, but I think I end up landing kind of similarly to where Tricia and Ellie have spoken, that there are folks in the community who really revere the American flag, many of them veterans. I think it's important to hear that out, and I think for me, our decision to allow another flagpole to fly a flag that we are legally required to fly does not take away from our prior acts and my personal support of flying the BLM flag. I agree, it's hard to hear the rationale behind the gift, but I think for me, I had to land in that other place. And again, I'm not sure that I would have landed there if we weren't already flying this flag, legally required to fly this flag. And again, it didn't, there's no condition on there that prohibits us from having discussions and engaging with our policy to consider other flags. So that's where I landed.
Jess?
Yeah, I was just gonna voice something similar to Jamie. I think what shocked me was that, like, usually when you talk about equity work, you talk about impact versus intent, and often what happens is we just think about the intent, which is usually positive, and the impact is usually what causes harm. Like, that's where a lot of, like, training and education around equity focuses on that idea. I think what shocked me is that the community member doing this work, which I love when community members do anything to rally their community, like, the intent was it was voiced very plainly, that it was, like, in response to raising the Black Lives Matter flag. So, I don't know, I just think that yeah, makes my feelings mirror Jamie's in the idea that even when you have a positive intent, you often have a negative impact. So when you have a negative intent, negative in the sense that it's done as a reaction to something else, you can anticipate negative impact.
Ellie?
I was thinking of the impact versus intent thing as well, but almost in an opposite kind of way of, like, thinking if a community member had come in here and said, hey, I really want to pay for a flagpole to fly alternative flags on separately from the American flag so that we're being respectful of some of the other community members and that might have negative reactions to this, and so I want to have a separate flagpole put up so that we can be more free to fly these other flags without hurting people's feelings or causing more contention, that would be a completely different intent kind of than this, but it's the same impact. Like, the impact here is that people that both can happen, and people, not one group of people is disproportionately feeling insulted or put out or in some way negatively impacted. So whether it's coming from somebody wanting to make space for alternative flags or somebody wanting to make a space specifically for the American flag, I don't think that matters. What matters is that we're making space for everybody.
Can I just say one more thing about it? I'm really sorry. It feels like separate but equal. Like, it's the literal words. That, like, we need a separate flagpole for this other thing, and we can't taint it with this other thing, which is the civil rights movement of our time. And it's going to cause people, like, it's going to cause resentment and anger and hostility. It's going to cause the question why we didn't do due diligence about who's funding it. Like, who knows? And should that, like, I think that should actually matter a little bit to us. The response we got from the BLM flag was from like organized hate groups who objected to it. It was the same objection that we heard tonight. And I'm just saying, like, I think we should have exercised much more caution in moving forward than we did.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to call for a motion for adjournment.
Before that motion, can I just say, Jamie,
Yes.
thanks for bringing this up in board discussion, and as putting board discussion on our agenda, like, this is exactly why we put this time period on the agenda, and so thank you for bringing this to us.
Thank you, Tricia.
Yeah.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.